The ghost of Graxia Prime. The wind, a frigid claw raking across exposed skin, reeked of seared metal and escalating dread. Kale tasted it, a metallic tang that settled like ash on his tongue. He hunkered down behind the gutted husk of a transport. Its Graxian sigils faded to ghosts, mirroring the desolation. This outpost, a cosmic dust mote barely registered on star charts, was a cluster of prefabricated cells clinging precariously to a barren plateau. Intended as a haven, a place for amnesia, it had become a kill box. KRYLL. Scouts, clumsy with youthful exuberance, had blundered into the outpost's archaic detection grid an hour prior. From the skeletal remains of the comm tower, he'd observed them. Chitinous forms catching the last rays of a dying sun as they navigated the jagged defile. Greenhorns, testing the perimeter, seeking an easy mark that he yielded ground, allowing them to advance that he wanted them within reach. The first one emerged from behind a HAB unit, its compound eyes gleaming with predatory anticipation. It clutched a bioweapon, a gruesome caricature of a rifle that promised gouts of corrosive ichor. Kale denied it that pleasure. A pulse blade, salvaged from a long-dead warship, bloomed into existence. It resonated, a subtle tremor of harnessed energy that sang against his bones. He moved with unexpected celerity, a shadow dancer in the encroaching night. The blade found purchase in the Kal-El's exoskeleton, severing head from torso in a seamless, horrifying ballet. The body collapsed, a twitching, bubbling ruin. Kale pressed on, already fading back into the shadows. Guerrilla warfare was his grim art. Strike swiftly, vanish without a trace, grind down the enemy, shatter their will. Honed in the steaming, blood-soaked jungles of Xylos, a world he desperately wished to expunge from memory. Another KRYLL materialized, weapon poised. Older, more circumspect, its gaze darted, seeking the source of the disturbance. Kale descended from the HAB unit roof, a silent predator falling upon its prey. An arm encircled its throat, constricting its windpipe. The KRYLL thrashed, limbs scything the air, but Kale's hold was implacable. A sharp twist, a sickening crack, and the body slumped, lifeless, to the dust point. Two less. More on the way. He relocated to the next staging point. A claustrophobic alley squeezed between two HAB units. The KRYLL's advance was inevitable. Fury would drive them. Vengeance would be their mantra. He was ready for their rage. The main assault exploded onto the scene with a primal roar that reverberated through the ravines. A horde of KRYLL warriors surged into the outpost, bioweapons spewing corrosive slime and incandescent plasma. The air thickened with the stench of frying circuits and dissolving flesh. Kale understood the odds were insurmountable, not single-handedly, but he could inflict damage. He could extract a toll in blood. He unleashed a flurry of pulse grenades, disrupting the KRYLL formation. The blasts tore through their chitinous armor, showering the area with razor-sharp fragments. He followed with sustained pulse rifle fire, targeting the wounded and disoriented stragglers. The KRYLL pressed forward, their sheer numbers a suffocating wave. They scaled the HAB units, their claws screeching against the metal siding. Kale retreated, firing in disciplined bursts, luring them deeper into the maze-like outpost. He reached the comm tower, a crumbling edifice offering an unobstructed panorama of the surrounding terrain. He activated the outpost's emergency beacon, a desperate, perhaps futile, signal for assistance. The KRYLL breached the tower, eyes burning with implacable animosity. Kale met them head-on, his pulse rifle a roaring extension of his will. He fought with a ferocity born of desperation, a blur of ruthless efficiency. He became a vortex of destruction, a lone warrior defying a relentless onslaught that he evaded and parried, deflecting blows and returning fire with merciless precision. He felt the searing kiss of acid on his skin, the jarring impact of strikes against his armor. Yet he persisted. He refused to yield. He fought with a fervor fueled by his shadowed past. Each fallen KRYLL was a painful atonement, a minute step toward an elusive redemption. But he knew it was insufficient. He could obliterate legions and still not cleanse the stains that marked his soul. A KRYLL warrior, larger and more heavily armored than its brethren, bore down on him. It brandished a massive biocannon, capable of vaporizing a HAB unit in a single discharge. A direct confrontation meant certain demise. He dropped to the ground. Executing a desperate roll beneath the KRYL's ponderous legs, he emerged behind it, plunging his pulse blade into the vulnerable joint connecting its thorax and abdomen. The KRYL bellowed in agony, thrashing wildly. Kale clung tight. Riding the monstrous creature like a bucking bronco, he twisted the blade, severing the KRL's neural pathways. The warrior toppled, the bio-cannon clattering to the ground with earth-shattering force. The momentum shifted. The KRYL, unnerved by the demise of their leader, wavered. Kale exploited their hesitation, driving them back with unremitting fire. He utilized the terrain, transforming the environment into a weapon. He was a specter, a harbinger of doom, stalking the KRYL's darkest fears. That he reached the outpost's armory, a compact, fortified bunker safeguarding a stockpile of heavy ordnance. He sealed the door behind him, shutting out the ravenous horde. The KRYL clawed and hammered at the metal barrier, their efforts futile. Kale dismissed their futile assault. He moved to the weapons rack, selecting a plasma cannon and a rocket launcher. He primed them with practiced grace, his hands operating with a swiftness honed by years of brutal experience. That he activated the armory's external speakers, his amplified voice resonating across the devastated outpost. "This is Kale. Your opportunity for withdrawal is at hand. Surrender or face obliteration." The KRYL responded with a unified chorus of savage roars, a defiant rejection of his ultimatum. Kale smiled, a mirthless contortion. "As you wish." He unsealed the armory door, unleashing a cataclysm of plasma and rockets. The KRYL were swept away in the inferno, their bodies atomized in a blinding flash. The outpost shuddered under the concussive force, the air thick with acrid fumes and pulverized debris. Kale emerged from the armory, his weapons still smoldering. The outpost was a desolate wasteland, a charnel ground of twisted metal and incinerated remains. The KRYL had vanished. He stood solitary, the victor, yet no elation accompanied his triumph. Only bone-deep weariness. He had endured once more. But at what sacrifice? He disabled the emergency beacon, recognizing that succor would arrive too late, if at all. That he was alone. Eternally alone. That he lifted his gaze to the celestial sphere, the stars cold and aloof. He wondered if he might ever discover tranquility, if he could ever outrun the specter of Graxia Prime. That a low-frequency hum resonated in the air. That he pivoted, his hand reflexively moving toward his pulse rifle. That a sleek, obsidian vessel descended from the heavens, its engines radiating an unsettling azure luminescence. That a Galactic Empire warship, its insignia emblazoned on its hull. The ship settled in the heart of the ruin, its ramp extending to the ground. That a squad of Imperial troopers emerged, their armor reflecting the starlight. They were commanded by a tall, imposing figure, his features concealed behind a mirrored helmet. The figure approached Kale, his footsteps echoing in the stillness. He halted a few feet away, his gaze intense. "Kale?" he inquired, his voice distorted by the helmet's comm system. Kale acknowledged him with a nod, his expression guarded. "Who are you?" "My designation is Captain Forlag. That I represent the Galactic Empire." Kale's brow furrowed. "The Empire? What is your purpose?" "We have been observing your actions. That we are not impressed by your capabilities." Kale remained silent, anticipating the inevitable revelation. "We have a proposition for you," Forlag continued. "The Empire requires soldiers of your caliber." Kale emitted a hollow, sardonic laugh. "The Empire seeks my allegiance, considering my past transgressions." Forlag's helmet tilted almost imperceptibly. "We possess knowledge of your past conduct, Graxia Prime, the 70,000 souls lost." The words hung in the balance, laden with judgment. Kale felt a cold wave wash over him. He had striven to bury that harrowing memory, to purge it from his consciousness, but it perpetually resurfaced, a haunting specter. "We believe you can channel your skills toward a more constructive purpose," Forlag stated, his tone softening slightly. "The KRYL represent a menace to the entire galaxy. That we require warriors capable of confronting them." Kale scrutinized the Imperial soldiers, their expressions unyielding and resolute. That he regarded the ship, an embodiment of authority and stability. That he returned his gaze to Forlag, seeking a flicker of sincerity. "What are the stipulations attached?" Kale inquired. The stipulation is that you will operate under the direction of the Empire. You will be subject to our chain of command. You will be expected to adhere to our regulations. Kale hesitated. He had always been a solitary operator. A nonconformist, he harbored a deep aversion to taking orders, but he also recognized that he could not remain in perpetual flight. He could not indefinitely evade his past. And should I decline this proposition? He inquired. Forlag shrugged. Then we shall depart, leaving you to your fate. However, I anticipate the KRYLL will eventually return, and on that occasion, your chances of survival will be considerably diminished. Kale weighed his options. He could remain here, alone and relentlessly pursued, or he could enlist with the Empire, serve a greater cause, and perhaps, just perhaps, discover some semblance of expiation. He surveyed the wreckage of the outpost. The KRYLL corpses scattered about. He recalled the 70,000 souls on Graxia Prime, their spectral faces silently condemning him. But he reached his decision. I accept your proposition, he said, his voice subdued but firm. I shall enlist with the Empire. Forlag nodded, a subtle hint of satisfaction in his voice. Excellent. You shall not regret this decision. Kale harbored profound doubts, but he had exhausted his alternatives. He shadowed Forlag up the ramp and into the ship's interior. As the doors sealed shut behind him, he glanced back at the outpost, a minuscule beacon in the vast cosmic darkness. He understood he was severing ties with his former existence, but he remained uncertain of what lay ahead. He understood only that the shade of Graxia Prime would forever accompany him, an offer from the stars. Ozone and KRYLL Ichor still hung acridly in the air. Kale remained a solitary figure amidst the wreckage, his pulse rifle arcing back and forth in a slow, watchful rhythm across the blighted vista. Since Forlag's arrival, he hadn't stirred, not even to cleanse the gore staining his armor, a monument to grim resolve and the heavy shadow of loss. Minutes later, a second shuttle descended, a stark contrast to Forlag's transport. Sleek and obsidian, it whispered of potent, decisive action. The ramp extended, and a figure emerged, projecting an air of refined authority that eclipsed Forlag's rough-hewn presence. This was no mere officer. The man stood tall, clad in a charcoal uniform subtly traced with silver. His face, etched with aristocratic lines, held a composed assessment. Eyes like chips of glacial ice missed nothing as they swept over the scene of carnage. He moved with the controlled grace of a predator surveying its domain. Ambassador Valerius. Valerius paused, his gaze lingering on a severed KRYLL appendage. Still jerking faintly in the dust, he betrayed no hint of distaste, his lips instead curving into a subtle, knowing smile. Efficiency, personified. Turning his attention to Kale, his stare remained unwavering. Impressive, he commented, his voice a smooth baritone that carried easily across the ravaged ground. Captain Forlag informs me you orchestrated this, tidying up. Kale lowered his rifle minimally, an economical gesture devoid of aggression or subservience. They were scouting, he stated, his voice raspy and used to conversation. They wouldn't have stopped at the outpost. Valerius nodded slowly, his eyes still cataloging details. Indeed, a pragmatic solution. One might even deem it preventative. After a brief pause, he added, I understand you possess a history, Sergeant. Kale's jaw tensed, the word echoing with unvoiced implications. He remained mute, offering no justification. Valerius, as if anticipating this, continued, the past is rarely simple, Sergeant. It's the future that holds our focus. He gestured toward the ruined landscape. The KRYLL pose a growing menace that we require individuals with your unique capabilities. He began moving toward Kale, his gait fluid and measured. Captain Forlag extended an offer of enlistment. I'm here to present you with something more. Kale watched him approach, his senses razor-sharp. Trust was a luxury he couldn't afford, least of all with someone who moved with such effortless command. More. The Galactic Empire needs not only warriors, Sergeant, but also guardians, protectors of the vulnerable, a bulwark against the encroaching darkness. Valerius halted a few feet away, his gaze intense. I speak of the Praetorian Guard. Kale's face remained impassive, but a flicker of surprise betrayed him. The Praetorian Guard, the Emperor's personal shield. Legends painted them as paragons of skill, unwavering loyalty, and chilling effectiveness to even be considered. The Praetorian Guard isn't a haven for reformed killers, Cale replied, the words tinged with self-deprecation. Valerius chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. The Empire is not so idealistic as to chase absolute purity, Sergeant. Experience, even hard one, holds value that we know of your deeds on Graxia Prime. Cale winced. The crushing weight of precisely channeled, that aptitude could prove invaluable. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Imagine, Sergeant, the power to safeguard not merely a desolate outpost, but the very heart of the Empire itself, the bulwark against the KRYLL tide, ensuring the safety of billions. The offer was seductive, a siren's call promising purpose. But Cale knew the price of such influence. The responsibility, the scrutiny, the relentless pressure to remain a weapon, not a man. Why me? Cale questioned, his voice low and gravelly. There must be others, soldiers with cleaner records, with more conventional training. Valerius smiled, a genuine expression this time, revealing a spark of warmth. Indeed, there are, but they lack something. A certain edge. A willingness to do what is demanded, irrespective of the cost. He paused. The Praetorian Guard demands complete allegiance, Sergeant, but also a degree of adaptability to bend the rules when necessary, to operate outside the prescribed boundaries, to achieve the desired conclusion. Extending his hand, he said, join the Praetorian Guard, Sergeant, serve the Empire, and perhaps discover redemption in the process. Cale stared at the proffered hand, his mind spiraling. Redemption, a word banished from his vocabulary, a concept dismissed as childish fancy, now presented like a glittering prize. But was it genuine salvation, or simply a different brand of damnation, trading one battlefield for another, swapping one set of directives for another? Would the specters of Graxia Prime ever release their hold, or would they forever whisper accusations? He met Valerius' gaze, seeking some crack in the facade, some glimmer of concealed intent. But the ambassador's face remained an inscrutable mask, his eyes polished mirrors reflecting only Cale's inner turmoil. What would be expected of me? Cale asked warily. Initially, rigorous training, Valerius answered. The Praetorian Guard comprises more than merely skilled combatants. They are masters of strategy, information, and diplomacy. You will face trials, pushed to your absolute limits, both physically and mentally. Only those who demonstrate their worth will earn the right to don the Praetorian armor. And after the training, you will be assigned to a specific sector, entrusted with protecting the Empire from both internal and external threats. Your tasks will vary according to your skill set and talents. You may be assigned to a diplomatic mission, a covert operation, or even the Emperor's personal security detail. Valerius paused, his eyes locking with Cale's. The Praetorian Guard is not for the faint of heart, Sergeant. It is a life of sacrifice, of unwavering devotion, but it is also a life imbued with purpose, with meaning, a chance to truly impact the galaxy. Cale remained silent, battling his inner demons. He recognized the dangers, the possibility of corruption, of abused privilege, but he also knew the alternative, a gradual, agonizing descent into the void, haunted by his past. I would need certain guarantees, Cale stated finally, his voice steady despite the inner storm. Assurances that my talents will be used responsibly, that I won't be asked to commit atrocities in the Empire's name. A knowing smile played on Valerius' lips. The Empire strives to uphold the highest ethical standards, Sergeant. However, conflict is seldom tidy. Difficult choices may become necessary, but I assure you, your actions will always be guided by the greater good. Cale harbored doubts. He knew the Empire capable of immense cruelty, of sacrificing individuals for political gain. Yet, he couldn't afford blind naivete. He had to cling to the hope that he could make a difference, that he could wield his abilities to shield the innocent, even within the intricate and often morally ambiguous framework of the Empire. And if I decline? Cale inquired, already knowing the answer, but compelled to hear it spoken aloud. Valerius' smile vanished, replaced by a calculating gaze. You will be returned to Captain Forlag's command. You will continue to serve the Empire in a more traditional role. However, the chance to prove yourself, to transcend your past, will be lost. You will remain a statistic, a footnote in the chronicles of Graxia Prime. The choice lay starkly before him: salvation or perdition, purpose or oblivion, the Praetorian Guard or a life of quiet despair. Kale drew a deep breath, solidifying his resolution. He understood the perils, the potential for disappointment, for betrayal. But he couldn't allow fear to dictate his decisions. He had to seize the opportunity, to grasp for the possibility of something better. Extending his hand, he said, "I accept your offer, Ambassador." Valerius seized his hand firmly, his grip surprisingly strong. "Excellent. I assure you, Sergeant Kale, you will not regret this decision. The Empire welcomes you." Turning to Forlag, who stood awkwardly nearby, he added, "Captain, prepare Sergeant Kale for transport to the Praetorian training facility on Corvus Prime. Ensure he is provided with all necessary equipment and briefing materials." Forlag nodded curtly, his face a mix of relief and resentment. He clearly hadn't anticipated such a prestigious offer for Kale. Valerius turned back to Kale, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. "Your journey commences now, Sergeant. Prepare yourself. The road ahead will be long and challenging, but the rewards are beyond measure." As Kale followed Forlag toward the shuttle, he cast a final glance at the desolate landscape. The KRYL corpses lay scattered across the ground, silent testaments to his skill and his ruthlessness. He was leaving this place, leaving his past behind. However, the specters of Graxia Prime would always linger, a constant reminder of the price of violence, the burden of guilt. He stepped onto the shuttle. The metal ramp ceiling shut behind him. He was entering a new existence, a world of power, intrigue, and peril. He was a weapon now, forged in the crucible of tragedy, sharpened by years of unforgiving combat. But could he evolve into something more? Could he find redemption in serving the Empire? Or would he merely become another instrument of destruction, a pawn in a galactic game of power? The answer, he sensed, awaited him among the stars that a warrior's weariness. Each plink of water in the sterile medbay was a hammer blow against Kale's skull, a morbid countdown of a life soaked in bloodshed. His gaze locked onto the plascrete ceiling, its flawless expanse mocking the jagged terrain of his memories. 70,000. That spectral number haunted him, a burden heavier than ceramite. Each fallen foe a wraith, their silent accusations a constant torment. He squeezed his eyes shut, a futile attempt to quell the rising tide of spectral voices that crescendoed into agonized screams. Weariness clung to him like a shroud, a bone-deep, soul-wrenching fatigue. He was sick of the scream of plasma cannons, the pungent reek of scorched flesh, the oppressive quiet that descended after each enemy's demise, the ceaseless churn of war, the shifting battle lines, the Pyrrhic victories. What was the point? He had fought for republics, alliances, anyone who waved a banner of justice, only to find more carnage, more devastation, more notches on his already overflowing kill roster. The shard of memory pierced the darkness. Graxia Prime. The air thick enough to taste, gritty with ash. The ground a graveyard of pulverized buildings and broken bodies. The KRYL poured forth, a living tide of chitin and snapping mandibles, their screeching like nails on the soul. He had been a captain back then, leading a handful of frightened rookies against impossible odds. Their faces, illuminated by the inferno of the dying city, were masks of pure terror. Not him. Fear had long been cauterized, leaving behind a chillingly efficient machine. He could still feel the pulse rifle in his grip, the visceral jolt as each volley tore through the KRYL swarm. The geyser of alien ichor, the sickening crack of splintering bone, the naked, raw horror in his men's eyes as they were overwhelmed, devoured alive. The kill counter on his HUD ticked relentlessly upward, an obscene celebration of lethal proficiency that he survived. Naturally, survival was his curse, but to what end? He had saved the city, but the cost echoed in the haunted faces of orphaned children, their gaze mirroring the desolation within him. Their unheard cries of anguish drowned out even the Kal-El's cacophony. Kale opened his eyes, the vision receding like a fading nightmare. He massaged his temples, trying to dispel the lingering phantom pain. Was there any escape from this relentless cycle? Was he forever doomed to be a weapon, An instrument of death, a monster in the eyes of those he swore to shield, a gravelly voice. Shattered his reverie. Still lost in the abyss, Sergeant? Rorik leaned against the doorway, his face etched with world-weary cynicism, but he held a steaming mug, the rich scent of synth cafe cutting through the sterile air. Figured you could use this. You look like you've been sucking on battery acid. Kale managed a feeble smile. Thanks, Rorik. He winced as he sat up, his ribs a chorus of protest. He accepted the mug, the warmth a small comfort against his clammy hands. Just thinking. Thinking's a luxury for a warrior, Rorik grumbled, pushing off the doorframe and approaching Kale's bedside. Especially one with your colorful reputation. Kale sipped the synth cafe, the bitter liquid failing to wash away the bile in his spirit. Valerius offered me a spot in the Praetorian Guard. Rorik's eyebrows shot up in surprise. The Praetorians? The Emperor's lapdogs? Well, that's a curveball. He paused, scrutinizing Kale's face. Taking it then? Kale hesitated, the silence hanging heavy. I don't know. It's tempting. A chance at something different. Maybe atone. Rorik snorted derisively. Atonement? Among the Praetorians? They're not exactly known for handing out charity. They're the Emperor's enforcers, Kale. All they worship is power and command. I know, Kale said, his voice low. But Valerius said. He said I could put my skills to good use protecting the Empire, actually make a difference for good. Protect the Empire? Rorik scoffed. The Empire doesn't need protection. That it's the one doing all the wrong. That it's the one who needs to be stopped. Kale sighed, the weight of countless failures pressing down on him. I know that too, Rorik, but what other option do I have? I can't just quit. That I'm a soldier. That's the only thing I'm good at. A flicker of empathy crossed Rorik's features. He knew Kale better than most. He had witnessed his triumphs and his darkest moments. He understood the crushing burden he carried, the weight of those lost lives. There are alternatives, Kale. You could vanish, find some backwater world, start over fresh, leave all this behind you. Kale shook his head, the futility of the notion evident. I can't. I already tried. It's no use. The specters always follow. He took another swallow of the synth cafe, the taste now acrid and unwelcome. Maybe, perhaps this is my chance. A chance to wield my abilities for something constructive. At least attempt to find some balance for all I have done. Rorik remained quiet for a long beat, his gaze glued to the floor. Finally, he looked up, his eyes heavy with a mix of concern and resignation. You know what you're signing up for, right? The Praetorians aren't exactly paragons of virtue. They'll use you up. Kale, they'll exploit your gifts, your darkness. I know, Kale repeated, his voice barely audible. But maybe, just maybe I can use them in return. Maybe I can discover a way to have a positive impact, even from within their system. Maybe there is still hope for me to have a chance at redemption. Rorik shook his head, a gesture of weary defeat. Redemption is a myth. Kale, that it's a fool's hope. You are what you are. A killer, and nothing will ever wash that away. Perhaps not, Kale said, a spark of stubborn defiance flaring in his eyes. But I can still try. He placed the mug on the bedside table, the sound sharp in the oppressive quiet. I'm going to do it, Rorik. I'm going to join the Praetorian Guard. Rorik exhaled heavily, running a hand through his receding hairline. Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you. This road, it's paved with sorrow. Kale, that's going to lead to more blood, more torment, more shadows. I know, Kale said, his voice unwavering despite the tremor in his hands. But I have to try it. I have to see if there's anything left to fight for within myself. The following morning, Kale stood before Valerius, the scars that mapped his face a testament to his violent past. The ambassador's smile was as polished as his armor plating. I trust you've reached a decision, Sergeant Kale? I have, Ambassador, Kale replied, his voice firm and clear. I accept your offer. Valerius's smile widened, radiating cold, calculated pleasure. Excellent. That I knew you wouldn't disappoint me. The Empire needs men like you, Sergeant. Men who will do what is necessary to secure its interests. Kale remained silent, his gaze steady and resolute. He understood Valerius's veiled meaning. He knew the grim tasks he was being enlisted for, the unsavory acts, the morally bankrupt activities, the tasks that anyone else would reject. But he was beyond all that. He was ready to do whatever was needed. He was ready to make any sacrifice, if it meant even a sliver of hope that he could find peace. Some whisper of redemption in the eternal gloom. Valerius clapped him on the shoulder, the gesture unexpectedly forceful. Good. Then let's get you prepared. You have a lot to learn, Sergeant, but I have no doubt you'll exceed all expectations. Cale nodded, his jaw tight with grim determination. He knew the path forward would be arduous, treacherous, and morally compromising. But he was committed. He had to be. He had nothing left to lose. He turned to Rorik, who stood a few paces behind him, arms folded across his chest, his expression inscrutable. Cale offered him a small, mournful smile. Take care of yourself, Rorik. Rorik nodded curtly, his gruff exterior masking a deeper affection. You too, Cale. And try not to wind up as space dust. I'm not cleaning up another one of your disasters. Cale chuckled, the sound echoing hollowly. I'll do my best. He paused, a weight of unspoken gratitude hanging in the air. Thanks, Rorik, for everything. Rorik just grunted in response, his customary display of stoicism. Cale knew it was his way of saying farewell. With a final, lingering glance at his old comrade, Cale turned and followed Valerius, leaving behind the familiar confines of the outpost and stepping onto a new and unknown path, one shrouded in uncertainty and peril, but one that offered a scintilla of hope, however faint, that he might finally outrun the ghosts of his past. As he walked towards the waiting transport ship, the haunting image of the KRYLL swarm faded, replaced by the cold, assessing gaze of Ambassador Valerius. The cycle of brutality may never end, but perhaps, just perhaps, he could influence where it strikes, the Imperial Crucible. The sky above the Imperial capital was a bruised purple, thick with the fumes of ceaseless orbital traffic. Stepping off the Just Cause, Cale felt the familiar prickle of anxiety. The very atmosphere thrummed with manic energy. This wasn't a war zone. This was the engine room, where lives were tallied in ledgers and influence oozed from every gilded cornice. The cadre of Praetorian guards, faces blank slates, awaited him at the landing pad. Their pearlescent armor seemed to drink the meager light, and their actions possessed an unsettling, rote precision, more escort than welcome. They ushered him through a maze of mirrored corridors, the air growing progressively sterile, a stark contrast to the grit-laced winds he knew. They halted before imposing double doors, the Imperial Aquila blazoned across their surface. With a synchronized snap to attention, one guard punched a code into a panel, and the portals sighed open, revealing a brilliantly lit chamber. Inside, a man in immaculate white, hands clasped behind his back, stood observing him. Dr. Eris Thorn, Cale recalled, was a gaunt figure with features honed to a razor's edge and eyes that seemed to dissect him with a single clinical assessment. Sergeant Cale, Thorn greeted, his voice a measured drone. Welcome to the Imperial Institute of Advanced Research. Your transit was adequate, I presume. Cale offered a curt nod, in no mood for civilities. Excellent. That we have much to gauge. If you will. Thorn pivoted and strode into the chamber, his steps echoing on the flawlessly polished floor. The room was a clinical panorama of gleaming steel and pulsing screens, alive with complex streams of data. Articulated arms whirred and clicked, performing inscrutable tasks. Cale felt like a specimen pinned beneath glass. Please disrobe and ascend the platform, Thorn instructed, indicating a raised disc at the room's center. Cale hesitated, a pulse of discomfort flitting through him. Disrobing felt violating. Yet, defiance was pointless. He released the fastenings of his fatigues, the coarse fabric pooling at his feet. Standing in his undershirt and trousers, he felt exposed, vulnerable. Scars, the chronicles of countless battles, webbed his torso, a testament to endured suffering. That he caught Thorn's gaze flicker. Over them, a spark of detached curiosity in their depths. Intriguing, Thorn murmured, almost to himself. The extent of the modifications, anticipated, naturally, given your service record. The platform vibrated to life. A scanning arm descended, tracing his form in cool blue light, the air buzzing with static. Cale felt a faint tingling sensation. We shall commence with a baseline evaluation of your physical aptitudes, Thorn explained. strength, stamina, reflexes, standard parameters. Our particular interest lies in the deviations. The scanner retracted. The platform rotated, presenting Kale with an array of robotic challenges that a mechanical arm extended, offering a weighted gauntlet. Lift this, Thorn ordered. Kale accepted the gauntlet. Its weight was deceptive, easily exceeding 200 kilograms. Without a second thought, he raised it above his head, holding it steady. Thorn's brow arched, almost imperceptibly. Impressive, though not wholly unexpected. The trials unfolded, each one designed to unearth Kale's limitations. That he ran on a treadmill that defied gravity, evading lasers that hummed with lethal potential. He battled robotic adversaries with impossible agility and precision. He weathered G-forces that would have pulped an ordinary human. Throughout it all, Kale remained impassive, his movements honed and efficient. That he conquered the pain. Drawing on a wellspring of resolve forged in the crucible of war, he refused to betray weakness. The physical assessments concluded. His body clamored in protest, his muscles screamed, but he stood firm, his gaze unwavering. Thorn appraised him, a peculiar blend of fascination and calculation in his gaze. Remarkable, he declared at last. Your physical tolerances surpass all projections. Your endurance is unparalleled. But now, a hint of anticipation colored his voice. We proceed to the more intricate facets. He guided Kale to another chamber, hushed and dimly lit. That a comfortable-looking chair, festooned with sensors, occupied the center. Be seated, Thorn instructed. Here we will explore the nuances of your psyche. Kale lowered himself into the chair, a disquieting premonition settling in his gut. He had faced countless physical perils, but the notion of having his mind dissected felt infinitely more unnerving. Thorn initiated the sensors. The sequence of images flashed across a screen. Serene landscapes, smiling faces, vignettes of ordinary life. Kale registered nothing, a dull ache in his chest. Then, the picture shifted. Scenes of war blazed across the screen. Detonations, carnage, the countenances of the fallen. Kale felt a jolt, a piercing stab of anguish. Memories surged, vivid and raw. He witnessed the faces of those he had slain, their eyes dilated with terror, their bodies contorted in death. The KRYL leered, their mandibles clicking and eyes burning with murderous intent. He clenched his fists, knuckles bone white. He struggled to suppress the memories, to banish them to the abyss from which they had risen. Thorn monitored the data streams, his face unreadable. Fascinating, he murmured. The predicted stress responses, but also something more. A profound sense of culpability. The images intensified. The faces of the dead loomed larger, more accusatory. Kale fought a rising tide of nausea. He longed to scream, to retaliate, to obliterate it all. That he closed his eyes, focusing on his breathing, seeking a still point amidst the tempest raging within. He recalled Rorik, and his pledge to use his abilities for the greater good. He recalled the innocence he could safeguard, the lives he could preserve. Gradually, the memories retreated, the pain subsided. He achieved a fragile equilibrium, a semblance of peace. Thorn ended the test. The images vanished. Kale opened his eyes, feeling hollowed out. Intriguing, Thorn repeated, a note of excitement threading his voice. Your mind is a battleground, Sergeant Kale. A terrain of trauma and extraordinary fortitude. You demonstrate a remarkable aptitude for compartmentalization, for suppressing the unwelcome aspects of your psyche. A skill, I surmise, honed by years of unrelenting conflict. Kale remained silent. He wanted no discourse about his past. He sought only oblivion. But there is something else, Thorn pressed, leaning closer, his eyes alight with intrigue. Something singular. A flicker of something I cannot quite define. It is as if you are waging a war on two fronts, not only against the enemies of the Imperium, but against your own self. He paused, scrutinizing Kale. Tell me, Sergeant, what impels you? What compels you to endure such suffering? What is it that you seek? Kale looked at Thorn, his eyes mirroring a weariness that transcended physical exhaustion. Redemption, he whispered. I seek redemption. Thorn smiled, a thin, unsettling smile. Redemption, he echoed. A compelling concept. An archaic notion, perhaps, in this modern epic. But tell me, Sergeant, do you truly believe that redemption is attainable? Can a man who has extinguished 70,000 souls ever truly be redeemed? Kale offered no rejoinder. He knew no answer. He only knew he had to pursue it. Thorn retreated a step, his expression pensive. The Emperor will be most intrigued by your assessment. You are a valuable asset, Sergeant Kale, a weapon of unparalleled potential. But, his voice sharpened, you are also a risk, a volatile entity. We must ascertain that you can be managed, that your internal conflicts will not undermine your allegiance to the Imperium. He turned and moved toward the exit. Quarters will be assigned. Rest, that we will resume the evaluation on the morrow. There are further tests we wish to conduct. Kale watched him depart, a sense of impending doom settling in his core. That he sensed that the Imperial crucible was about to intensify. He felt unsure he would survive the forging, or if redemption was even remotely attainable. Trial by fire. The training grounds resonated with the clangor of simulated war. Energy weapons spat crackling bolts. Vibroblades whirred like angry insects, and the very air vibrated with the pent-up energy of straining bodies. Kale, encased in the drab gray of standard training gear, felt the rush of adrenaline, a fleeting distraction from the persistent knot of unease residing within him. He'd exchanged Thorn's sterile laboratory for the brutal candor of the Praetorian proving grounds, but the true ordeal, he suspected, loomed on the horizon. He lingered at the perimeter of the combat circle, observing the orchestrated pandemonium. A motley array of recruits, a tapestry of species and histories, engaged in paired combat under the stern gaze of instructors etched with the scars of battles past. The Praetorian Guard, the Emperor's bulwark, the living manifestation of imperial strength. The mere chance to stand among them felt like an unearned gift, one he was determined to justify. His attention was drawn to a particularly imposing human recruit, his face a mask of concentration, his movements honed by relentless practice. He parried strikes with effortless grace and delivered blows with pinpoint accuracy. Jax, the briefing had called him, a highly decorated veteran, earmarked for Praetorian consideration. A booming voice shattered the AIRAN instructor, a titan of a man whose shaved head revealed a network of gleaming cybernetics, roared. New blood. Into the arena. Show us what you're worth. Kale advanced, his steps deliberate and controlled. He could feel the weight of scrutiny, the silent evaluation that a Volokian, a species synonymous with raw power, ambled towards him, hefting a vibroaxe. Human, the Volokian rumbled, his voice a guttural rasp. You'll be pulverized. Kale offered no retort. He simply waited, his senses amplified, dissecting the Volokian's posture, the way he gripped the axe, the imperceptible shift in his balance. The axe descended in a sweeping arc. Kale danced aside, the blade whistling past his ear in a breath of displaced air. That he moved with an unexpected celerity, a deceptive grace belying his stature. He didn't challenge the Volokian's brute force directly, opting instead to exploit it, applying a subtle pressure point attack to the elbow that sent a wave of agony through the Volokian's limb. The axe tumbled from nerveless fingers. Before the Volokian could recover, Kale executed a swift leg sweep, sending him crashing to the ground. The Volokian bellowed in frustration, struggling to regain his footing. That he charged once more, but this time, Kale was prepared. He anticipated the assault, his movements precise and lethal, a disarming maneuver. A sharp kick to the knee, and the Volokian was sprawled on the Duracrete, gasping for breath. The instructor observed with a dispassionate eye. Enough, he stated, his voice flat. Next, Kale remained rooted, his heart hammering against his ribs, the metallic tang of adrenaline coating his tongue. Another recruit stepped forward, a slender, reptilian Xantarian brandishing a pair of energy daggers. This engagement was quicker, more sinuous. The Xantarian relied on velocity and nimbleness, darting in and out, attempting to overwhelm Kale with a barrage of attacks. Kale, however, was adaptable. He adjusted his footing, his cadence. Foreseeing the Xantarian's thrusts, he leveraged the arena to his advantage, retreating towards a training mannequin, utilizing it as a makeshift shield. That he wasn't merely reacting. He was anticipating, predicting, Dictating the ebb and flow of the skirmish, he recognized subtle cues in the Xantarian's actions. The minute twitch of a caudal appendage before a lunge, the fleeting hesitation before a jump. He exploited these tells, converting the Xantarian's speed into a liability, diverting his momentum, forcing him into unfavorable situations. Ultimately, with a perfectly timed parry and a sharp kick to the sternum, Kale disarmed the Xantarian, sending him reeling backwards. The Xantarian, bruised and winded, yielded. The instructor's face remained unreadable, but Kale detected a flicker of something akin to interest in his gaze. He had surmounted the first hurdle, but he understood it was merely a prelude. As he retreated, catching his breath, he noticed Jax observing him, his expression inscrutable, no hostility, but no friendliness either, just a detached, analytical appraisal. Later, during a respite, Kale found himself near Jax. The other recruits afforded him a wide berth, murmuring amongst themselves that he was an alien presence, a curiosity, a potential adversary. "Your fighting is not effective," Jax commented, his voice blunt, eschewing civilities. "Thank you," Kale responded, maintaining a neutral inflection. "Your style that it's unconventional," Jax continued. "Efficient, undeniably, but at almost savage." Kale paused. "It's what I was taught." Jax gave a slow nod. "Where did you learn to fight that way?" Kale remained silent. The question lingered, an unspoken reminder of the past he sought to bury. Jax didn't press further. He seemed to grasp that some inquiries were best left unspoken. "We're meant to be a cohesive unit," he stated, his gaze focused on the training circle. "The Praetorian Guard, that we must be able to depend on one another." "I understand," Kale said. "I will carry my weight." The following day, the instruction intensified. The recruits were subjected to a series of punishing exercises designed to assess their physical and mental fortitude. They navigated assault courses, traversed mock battle zones, and participated in close-quarters combat drills. Kale excelled that he moved with a quiet dynamism, his movements precise and economical, that he seemed to foresee every obstacle, every challenge. That he pushed himself beyond his limits, disregarding the ache, the weariness, propelled by an overwhelming need to validate himself. During one drill, the recruits were assigned to infiltrate a simulated enemy stronghold. They were divided into squads, and Kale found himself teamed with Jax and two other aspirants. The simulation was engineered for maximum verisimilitude. The base was heavily fortified, with automated sentry guns, surveillance drones, and simulated enemy combatants. The terrain was perilous, riddled with tripwires and concealed hazards. The squad advanced stealthily, relying on guile and synchronization. Jax spearheaded the operation, employing his tactical acumen to navigate the complex layout of the compound. Kale shadowed him, his senses heightened, alert for impending threats. As they neared a heavily guarded checkpoint, Jax signaled them to freeze. "We need to circumvent it," he whispered. "Too many sentries will be exposed." Kale scanned their surroundings. He spotted a narrow ventilation duct, partially obscured by dense foliage. "What about that?" he proposed, gesturing towards the duct. "We might be able to utilize it to bypass the checkpoint." Jax weighed the proposition. "It's a gamble," he conceded. "Confined space, limited field of vision, but it may be our only recourse." They decided to take the risk. Kale volunteered to proceed first. His slight frame an advantage in the cramped space. He squeezed through the constricted aperture, his body scraping against the corrugated metal. The ventilation shaft was dim and dusty. The air hung thick with the acrid reek of stale metal and decay. Kale advanced slowly, cautiously, his senses on red alert. As he rounded a bend, he encountered a reconnaissance drone, its sensors methodically sweeping the shaft. The drone registered his presence immediately, its alarm screeching. Kale reacted instinctively. He lunged forward, his movements swift and decisive. He disabled the drone with a single, calculated strike, silencing its warning. That he signaled to Jax and the others, indicating that the passage was secure. They followed him through the shaft, emerging on the far side of the checkpoint. They had successfully evaded the guards, but they remained deep within hostile territory. They needed to reach the main control nexus and deactivate the base's defenses. As they traversed the base, they encountered stiff resistance. Simulated enemy soldiers ambushed them from concealed positions, unleashing volleys of energy fire. Jax and the other recruits returned fire, engaging the enemy in a fierce exchange. Kale moved rapidly, flanking the enemy positions, neutralizing them with swift, precise attacks that he moved with relentless efficiency. His actions a blur of controlled violence, he was a force of nature, a tempest of destruction that he fought with a consuming intensity, driven by an ardent desire to safeguard his comrades. During the firefight, Jax was pinned down by enemy fire that he was exposed, vulnerable, in imminent danger. Without hesitation, Kale surged forward, drawing the enemy's attention to himself that he moved like a wraith, evading energy pulses. Closing the distance with astonishing speed, he engaged the enemy soldiers in close-quarters combat, disarming them, incapacitating them, shielding Jax from harm. Together, they battled their way to the main control nexus. Inside, they encountered the base commander, a heavily armored and armed figure. The commander engaged them in a ferocious confrontation, unleashing a barrage of energy fire with deadly precision. Jax and the other recruits returned fire, but they were outmatched. Kale moved with alacrity, flanking the commander. Engaging him in hand-to-hand combat, he fought with a ferocity that startled even himself. He harnessed his knowledge of pressure points, his mastery of unarmed combat, to gain the advantage. Finally, with a surgically precise strike to the commander's trachea, Kale incapacitated him, bringing the engagement to a close. They had successfully completed the simulation. They had demonstrated their proficiency, their cooperation, their tenacity. As they emerged from the simulation chamber, weary but triumphant, Jax turned to Kale, his face etched with respect. "You saved my life in there," he said. "I owe you one." Kale shrugged. "We're a team," he said. "That's what teams are supposed to do." Jax nodded slowly. "You're more than just a capable fighter, Kale," he said. "You possess the heart of a true warrior." Kale offered no reply. He knew Jax was correct. He was a warrior, but he also carried a burden, a darkness, that he desperately hoped to shed. The shadowed tally of lives remained a haunting presence, an indelible part of his being, and he understood, in the pit of his stomach, that the trials had only just begun. Sparks of curiosity. The immaculate corridors of the research center resonated with a subtle, almost subsonic pulse. Kale, still acclimating to the rigid order of the Praetorian training regime, felt a knot of apprehension tighten as he navigated towards Sector Gamma 9, designated for biomechanical integration studies. A terse directive had summoned him, citing his distinct physiological makeup as crucial for ongoing analyses. Sector Gamma 9 revealed itself as a vast, circular lab. Machines buzzed, flickered, and spun up mid-air, holographic projections of something vaguely saurian interwoven with metallic components pirouette. The atmosphere carried a tang of ozone mingled with a scent reminiscent of damp iron. In the epicenter, encircled by data slates and exposed wiring, stood a young woman. A riot of auburn hair escaping its precarious coil, her oversized protective lenses sat perched above keen eyes, while her jumpsuit adhered to imperial standards. It bore a kaleidoscope of enigmatic stains. Lost in thought, she murmured, brow deeply creased. "No, blast it, that's off. The neural interfaces aren't harmonizing." Kale announced his presence with a deliberate cough. She jolted, nearly fumbling a diminutive, multi-limbed automaton. "Ah, you're here. Kale, isn't it?" Hastily, she set the robot down on a nearby workbench, movements sharp and hurried. "Zara. Zaratal. I requested your presence." She extended a hand, then hesitated, self-consciously wiping it against her thigh. "Terribly sorry. Biological residue. Force of habit." Kale clasped her hand. Her grip possessed surprising strength. "I received the summons." Zara's face lit up. "Splendid. I've been reviewing your operational data. Utterly compelling, truly. Your bio readings during the simulation, unparalleled adrenaline and endorphin levels, yet also a curious muting of amygdala activity that's akin to experiencing both heightened sensitivity and dispassion." She circled him, eyes shining with scientific fervor, like a naturalist studying a novel organism. Kale shuffled, uncomfortable under the intensity of her gaze. He was accustomed to scrutiny, even intense observation, but Zara's scrutiny felt different. less critical, more probing. I'm not certain I follow. It suggests you engage uniquely. The majority of warriors, even elite ones, exhibit predictable physiological reactions to duress, elevated heart rate, pupillary dilation, amplified reflexes. You display these as well. However, it's almost managed that you're pushing your physical form beyond projected limits, but without the usual incapacitating repercussions. She tapped a data screen. Your confirmed kill rate is, to put it mildly, statistically improbable. Kale's jaw hardened. There it was, the unspoken question, the underlying distrust. He'd grown accustomed to anticipating it. Zara, however, seemed oblivious to his shift in demeanor, lost in her own intellectual pursuit. I'm determined to decipher how your neural structure compensates, how your musculature adapts, how you override the body's intrinsic safeguards. She indicated an examination platform. Please, take a seat. Nothing invasive, I assure you. Simply some non-intrusive scans, cerebral activity, muscle density, reflexive responses. Kale hesitated. He disliked being subjected to medical procedures. Yet, he detected an authentic inquisitiveness in Zara's expression, a sincere yearning to comprehend, not condemn. Perhaps, he mused, assisting her in understanding might aid him in better understanding himself. That he mounted the table. Hours elapsed, filled with a barrage of evaluations involving flashing lights, clicking monitors, and sporadic minor electrical stimulation. Kale felt more depleted than after the most punishing training session. Zara, contrarily, practically vibrated with energy. Remarkable, utterly remarkable. The manner in which your brain processes spatial information, the velocity at which your muscles recuperate, it's evolutionarily advantageous, I suspect. She commenced pacing, muttering to herself. Perhaps a genetic outlier? Or a trauma-precipitated adaptation? Kale sat up, a touch lightheaded. What conclusions did you draw? Zara ceased her pacing and fixed him with a softened expression. The conclusion is that you are extraordinary. You're an anomaly, Kale, and anomalies warrant investigation. She paused. But not exploitation. That I give you my word that I merely aspire to comprehend, that I wish to unlock the secrets of human potential. He pondered her declaration. He'd been branded with numerous labels, yet extraordinary wasn't among them. He typically inspired dread or revulsion. Zara appeared genuinely impressed, even awestruck. Why? He asked, his voice raspy. Why does it matter to you? Zara toyed with her goggles, pushing them onto her forehead. Because understanding fuels progress. Understanding ourselves, acknowledging our constraints, realizing our capabilities, it constitutes the singular path toward a superior future. And because I'm driven by curiosity. She offered a hesitant, almost apologetic smile. As Kale swung his legs off the table, a faint, metallic clatter emanated from behind a bank of diagnostic equipment. A scarred, dented service bot, its plating chipped, and its optical sensors blinking erratically, trundled forward. The IT was painted regulation gray, but the paint peeled away, revealing rust beneath. One of its manipulator arms canted at an unnatural angle. Unit 734 reporting. Dr. Tao requires assistance with data collation. Also, beverage provision is advised. Subject Kale appears depleted. The bot's vocalizations were a peculiar, distorted fusion of static and synthesized speech. Zara chuckled. This is Unit 734. We refer to him as Rustied. He's a work in constant development. She affectionately patted the bot's chassis. His programming is somewhat erratic. However, he proved surprisingly useful and surprisingly astute. Rusty extended its functional manipulator arm, offering Kale a small, pre-packaged nutrient bar. Nutrient supplement, strawberry flavor, recommended for post-exertion restitution. Kale accepted the bar. Taken aback, he hadn't anticipated a dilapidated service bot offering him succor. He glanced from Zara to Rusty, a spark of warmth kindling within. He had entered this facility anticipating dissection, analysis, and ultimately, judgment. Instead, he'd stumbled upon something different, connection, perhaps, or at least, the genesis of it. Thank you, he said, his tone marginally less rough. Zara beamed. You're welcome, Kale. Perhaps we could resume this tomorrow. There are a few additional tests I'd like to perform. And I'd welcome hearing further details of your training modalities. Kale nodded. He remained uncertain regarding Zaratao or her derelict robotic companion, but he knew one thing. He, too, was intrigued. During the ensuing weeks, Kale discovered himself spending an increasing amount of time within Sector Gamma 9. He assisted Zara with her explorations, imparting his insights into his unique combat strategies, elucidating the methodologies he'd perfected through years of unrelenting conflict. He even aided her in resolving some of Rusty's more peculiar malfunctions. He gained knowledge of the intricate engineering of the KRYLL exoskeletons she was studying, the extraterrestrial technology she sought to understand, and the subtle intricacies of human anatomy. Zara, in turn, appeared to flourish in Kale's company. Her confidence burgeoned, her energy intensified, her initial awkwardness gradually dissipating. She barraged him with inquiries, encompassing not only his combat proficiencies, but also his history, his drives, his fears. She refrained from prying or pressuring excessively, listening intently to his every word, her gaze imbued with genuine compassion. He found himself confiding in her, disclosing fragments of his past, the recollections that haunted his sleep. He withheld certain details, as of yet, but he shared enough for her to grasp the weight he carried, the culpability that consumed him. Rusty, meanwhile, became an unexpected confidant. The bot's flawed programming occasionally yielded unexpected wisdom, and its unwavering devotion to Zara proved strangely reassuring. It would offer unsolicited guidance on subjects ranging from battlefield tactics to interpersonal dynamics, its garbled pronouncements a constant, albeit somewhat disconcerting, presence within the laboratory. One evening, as Kale assisted Zara in calibrating a novel sensor array, Rusty trundled up to him. Subject: Kale, analysis complete. Conclusion: you are exhibiting enhanced emotional self-regulation. Recommend continued interaction with Dr. Tao. Probability of felicitous outcome, 87.3%. Kale arched an eyebrow. And by what criteria do you define a felicitous outcome? Rusty's optical sensors flickered. Definition of felicitous outcome remains variable. However, parameters include diminished incidence of self-destructive tendencies, augmented social integration, and attainment of a genuine smile. Kale chuckled. He hadn't realized his emotions were so easily read. Zara glanced up from her task, amusement dancing in her eyes. Pay him no mind. Kale, he's been watching excessive amounts of Holovitz. But Kale knew that Rusty, in its own peculiar, robotic manner, spoke truthfully. He was feeling improved. He remained haunted by his prior actions, still driven by his quest for redemption. Yet, he was also beginning to perceive a glimmer of optimism, a chance for finding purpose, not solely in Imperial service, but also in his connection with Zara and her quirky, Rusty machine. That evening, Kale returned to his quarters, the pristine walls seeming marginally less suffocating. The burden on his shoulders somewhat lightened. He cast his gaze upward at the artificial constellations projected onto the ceiling, and for the first time since enlisting in the Praetorian Guard, he permitted himself to envision a future, encompassing not merely duty and expiation, but something more, something akin to companionship, something akin to anticipation. The seeds of trust, however fragile, had taken root. Whispers in the barracks. The barracks pulsed with a low-grade anxiety, a hive of 200 enhanced soldiers, each desperately seeking a place among the Emperor's Praetorian Guard. But amongst these near-perfect specimens, Kale stood apart. His movements possessed a fluid economy, the quiet menace of a panther amidst pedigree hounds. 70,000. Forlag's voice, gravel-edged and resonant, vibrated through the mess hall. That's the count. 70,000 souls sent to the void, verifiable. Jax, across the table, considered this as he gnawed on a nutrient bar. The rumors had been persistent, a prickly static clinging to the air, thick with disbelief and simmering apprehension. Verified by whom? Forlag. A personal decree from the Emperor. Forlag slammed a fist onto the metal surface, making the protein paste trays jump. Don't play the fool, Jax. Where else would such intel originate? This is sanctioned knowledge. They intend for us to know. He lowered his voice, his gaze sweeping the room. And why wouldn't they? Shows us the caliber of the competition. What sort of weapon they're trying to control. Jax's brow furrowed. He's a candidate like the rest of us, Forlag, enduring the same torturous regimen. Is he truly? Did you witness him navigate the zero-G simulations, graceful as a dancer born in freefall, and his pain tolerance? Whispers claim the neural overrides barely registered. A flicker, perhaps. Forlag spat, an outward display of disdain. There's a wrongness to him. A tang of the KRYLL. The KRYLL. The very syllable resonated with dread, conjuring images of the insectoid horde, the Empire's ancient adversaries, a relentless tide threatening to engulf civilization. The comparison felt like a vile slur, dripping with venom and danger. That's a foul accusation, Forlag, Jax retorted, his tone hardening. He's human. Whatever his history, it's precisely that, history. Or is the Empire peddling souls to the devil? Unleashing a monster to combat monsters. We sacrifice our lives for the Emperor, and he gifts us this abomination. Forlag shoved his tray away, his appetite vanquished. Mark my words, Jax, something is amiss. We must delve into his past. Jax observed Forlag's departure, his words lingering like a noxious gas. He couldn't dismiss the suspicion that Forlag was deliberately fanning the flames of discontent. Yet, he couldn't ignore the unsettling prickle of unease. Kale was anomalous, radiating an inner intensity, a silent power that marked him as different. Later, during weapons calibration, Jax found himself stationed near Kale. The air crackled with the energy of plasma rifles charging, laced with the sharp tang of ozone. Kale remained still as a statue, his focus riveted on the holographic target, his adjustments subtle, efficient. Kale, Jax initiated, striving for a casual tone. Heard you shown in the zero-G exercises. Kale didn't turn. My performance was sufficient. Jax raised an eyebrow. Sufficient? The instructors had been effusive in their praise. Merely sufficient? You made it appear effortless. Effortless it was not, Kale responded, his voice devoid of inflection. It demanded unwavering concentration. Jax hesitated, choosing his words carefully. So, where did you acquire such skill? Some orbital habitat. Kale finally turned, his eyes burning with an intense, unsettling light. That is irrelevant to the demands of our current training. Frustration flickered within Jax. He was attempting to build rapport, but Kale remained impenetrable, a fortress of secrets. Everything is relevant. Kale, that will be fighting as brothers in arms, that we need to understand who stands beside us. You know all that is necessary, Kale replied. I am a candidate for the Praetorian Guard. Come now, Kale. The rumors are rampant. 70,000 kills. That's hardly the typical recruit's resume. Kale's jaw clenched. Those numbers are meaningless. They represent a Chapter 1 wish to close. Close, or bury them so deep that even you can't find them. The words escaped before Jax could restrain them. He witnessed a fleeting shadow of torment flicker across Kale's features, a brief glimpse into the darkness Forlag had alluded to. Kale turned away, dismissing him with a gesture. My history is mine to bear. IT is of no concern to you. Jax stood, feeling as though he had crossed a line. He yearned to understand Kale, but only succeeded in driving him further into his shell. Turning back to his station, he caught Forlag's eye from across the room, a triumphant smirk playing on his lips. The ensuing days were a grueling cycle of demanding drills and relentless pressure. However, the atmosphere within the barracks had curdled. The murmurs surrounding Kale intensified, becoming louder, more accusatory. Whispers painted him as the recipient of special favors, of preferential treatment. Some recruits began to shun him outright, while others regarded him with thinly veiled animosity. Jax observed Kale retreating further into himself, becoming ever more isolated. He ate his rations alone, trained in solitude, rarely engaging in conversation. A gnawing unease grew within Jax. He recognized Forlag's hand in the rising tide of prejudice. But sensed the Empire's complicity. They had introduced Kale, flaunted his achievements, then abandoned him to weather the inevitable storm of resentment. One evening, Jax spotted Rusty, the maintenance bot, diligently polishing boots near Kale's bunk. Rusty, Jax addressed him, striving for a casual tone. You seem to spend considerable time around Kale. Rusty paused, his optical sensors whirring softly. Designated maintenance schedule necessitates optimal upkeep of all equipment, footwear included. Indeed, Jax replied, suppressing a smile. But you converse with him, do you not? He seems withdrawn. Rusty tilted his head. Master Kale exhibits a preference for minimal social engagement. However, he adheres to designated maintenance protocols with commendable respect. Jax leaned closer. Does he ever speak of his past? Of his previous endeavors? Rusty's metallic hand twitched minutely. Directive prohibits the dissemination of classified information. Classified? So you possess knowledge? Rusty whirred once more, his voice rising to a slightly higher register. All data pertaining to personnel is securely stored within the designated mainframe. Access is restricted to authorized personnel only. Jax sighed inwardly. He wouldn't extract anything from Rusty. The Empire had clearly hardwired him for discretion. As he prepared to depart, his gaze fell upon something secreted beneath Kale's pillowed at a small, time-worn datapad. Curiosity trumping caution, Jax reached out and retrieved it. The screen was cracked, but still functional. He pressed the power button and waited for the device to initialize. The screen flickered to life, revealing a series of images. They were grainy and distorted, but Jax could discern certain details: that a vibrant, verdant planet, that a gathering of people, their faces alight with laughter and joy, that a young woman with flowing ebony hair. Then, the images morphed, transitioning into a nightmare. The green planet transformed into a scorched wasteland. The people vanished, replaced by scenes of carnage, of devastation, of war. A cold dread seeped into Jax's core. That he recognized the insignia adorning the uniforms of the soldiers depicted in the images. They belonged to a long extinct rebellion, a faction that had waged war against the Empire decades earlier. He navigated through the images, each more horrifying than the last. He saw Kale, younger, his face a mask of chilling, ruthless determination. He was leading the rebels, battling against the Empire. He was a turncoat. Jax swiftly deactivated the datapad and returned it to its hiding place beneath Kale's pillow. Nausea churned in his stomach. That he now knew the truth about Kale's past, but revealing it would unleash a cataclysm of consequences, not only for Kale, but potentially for himself. He scanned the barracks. The incessant murmuring had subsided, replaced by a palpable tension. He saw Forlag observing him again, his eyes gleaming with knowing anticipation. Jax understood that Forlag suspected something. He faced a crucial decision: protect Kale and risk being branded a traitor himself, or expose him and solidify his own standing within the Praetorian Guard. As he turned toward his bunk, a soft voice halted him. Jax. He turned to face Kale, his eyes dark and inscrutable. Did you unearth what you sought? Kale inquired, his voice barely audible. Jax swallowed hard. He knew that Kale knew. He had witnessed him, had seen him examining the datapad. I'm ignorant of your meaning, Jax stammered, his heart hammering against his ribs. Kale closed the distance between them, his gaze piercing. Do not dissemble, Jax. I know you viewed the images. That I know you are aware of the truth. Jax hesitated, poised on the precipice of a crucial choice. He could deny it, feign ignorance, but he recognized the futility of such a charade. Kale saw through him with unnerving clarity. He inhaled deeply, steeling himself. Yes, Kale. I saw them. I saw everything. Kale nodded slowly, almost imperceptibly. And what action will you take? Jax met Kale's gaze, searching for some sign, some clue. He saw pain, regret, and perhaps a faint glimmer of something akin to hope. He reached his decision. I don't know, Kale, Jax confessed, his voice a bare whisper. In all honesty, I haven't the slightest idea. The weight of the Empire, the weight of 70,000 lost souls, the weight of a concealed secret pressed down upon them, an invisible burden. The whispers within the barracks had finally found their voice, and Jack stood trapped at the epicenter. His loyalty, his ambitions, and his very survival hung precariously in the balance, secrets unearthed. Corvus Prime sprawled before Valerius, a metropolis of burnished towers that speared towards the heavens. Sunlight glinted off their durasteel surfaces in a dazzling display, a sight that usually filled him with a sense of the Empire's vast dominion. Not today. A cold premonition coiled in his gut, a sensation alien after years of unwavering conviction. The whispers clung like shadows, persistent. Corrosive rumors snaking through the Praetorian ranks point 70,000 lives. The KRYLL atrocity, Kale.A. Name that had once resonated with promise now echoed with a horrifying new timbre. He, Valerius, had championed Kale for the elite program. The man's acute skill, relentless drive, almost unsettling focus. All signs pointed to a warrior of exceptional caliber. In Kale, he'd envisioned a bulwark for the Emperor, an immovable force for order. He'd clung to the hope of Kale's potential for expiation, a chance to absolve himself of the darkness that veiled his history. But could any amount of good outweigh the slaughter of 70,000 souls? Turning from the window, his reflection a mask of concern on the polished floor, he acknowledged the obvious. Forlag's accusations reeked of ingrained bigotry, a malady afflicting the Empire's underbelly. Yet, dismissing Forlag didn't silence the disquieting murmurs. The coincidences stacked too high. The smoke hinted at a roaring fire. A sigh escaped his lips, swallowed by the sterile drone of his office. Duty pressed, a binding oath to the Emperor, to the very structure of the Empire. Sentimentality couldn't cloud his judgment. He required truth, no matter the personal cost. Summoning his personal calm, Valerius initiated a shielded transmission. Theta, report. A static-tinged voice replied. At your command, Ambassador. I need a discreet probe, Valerius stated, his tone low and precise. Subject, Kale, his complete background, exhaustively researched. Prioritize anything relating to the KRYLL uprising, specifically what transpired on Cygnus 7 5 years prior. Acknowledged, Ambassador, Theta affirmed. Secrecy guaranteed, data delivered within the cycle. Valerius terminated the link, the silence amplified by the weight of his unease. He loathed this. The insidious doubt, the creeping suspicion, the sensation of being played. He had invested his faith in Kale, and now that trust felt precarious, on the verge of shattering. The cycle crawled by, each passing moment a tightening of the vice on Valerius's nerves. He attempted to immerse himself in the myriad tasks of his position, the ceaseless flow of diplomatic correspondence, trade negotiations, and political maneuvering that kept the gears of the Empire turning. Yet, Kale's name persisted, an unbidden, unwelcome specter. Finally, the chime announced Theta's delivery. Valerius paused, his hand hovering over the file, but a part of him resisted the truth. The part yearned to preserve the idealized image of Kale, the warrior striving for absolution. But obligation won out. A deluge of fragmented records flooded his screen. Intercepted communiques, grainy holocaptures. He began to sift through the information, his eyes darting across the details. The initial reports were mundane. Kale's birth on a backwater world, his exceptional physique, early enrollment in the local militia. Nothing exceptional. Then, the accounts of Kale's involvement in the rebellion surfaced, his rapid ascent through the rebel hierarchy, his tactical acumen, his unwavering devotion to the cause, all coalesced into the portrait of a fearsome and effective leader. The records depicted a man driven by an unyielding commitment to liberty, willing to sacrifice everything for his convictions. But the later reports, they were starkly different, bleaker, deeply unsettling. He uncovered intercepted exchanges between Kale and high-ranking insurgents, discussing strategy, logistics, and casualty assessments. The numbers were staggering, battles euphemized as necessary losses, civilian populations dismissed as unavoidable consequences. A frigid dread seeped into Valerius's core. This was not the image of a valiant freedom fighter. This was something far more sinister. And then, he found it, the Cygnus 7 dossier, the KRYLL massacre. The reports were incomplete, redacted in parts. Yet the unadulterated horror shone through. The KRYLL, a sapient insectoid race, had suffered brutal repression on Cygnus 7. That the rebels accused them of colluding with the Empire, of betraying the fight for liberation. And Kale had commanded the operation. A poorly rendered holo-recording depicted the aftermath. The grisly images flickered across the screen, seared into Valerius's memory. Heaps of KRYLL corpses, their chitinous carapaces broken, their multifaceted eyes staring lifelessly at the sky. Buildings reduced to smoldering piles, the air thick with the cloying stench of decay. The report attributed the slaughter to a radical faction within the rebel ranks, extremists acting without Kale's sanction. But that explanation rang hollow. The scope of the operation, its meticulously coordinated execution, defied belief that it could have transpired without Kale's knowledge. Without his implicit approval, he dug deeper, seeking verification that he unearthed encrypted missives hinting that Kale had given explicit orders to seal off all KRYLL settlements, preventing any escape. He found sworn testimonies, smuggled off Cygnus 7 in the aftermath, portraying Kale as a detached, calculating figure, devoid of compassion. One testimony, in particular, sent a shiver down his spine. It came from a KRYLL survivor, a young female who had witnessed the annihilation of her entire family. She described Kale as the harbinger of silence, a man whose eyes reflected the soul-chilling emptiness of the void. She claimed he'd personally executed numerous KRYLL leaders, displaying chilling indifference to their desperate pleas. Valerius sank back into his chair, the room spinning. The evidence was circumstantial, piecemeal, but the cumulative effect was devastating. Kale was not the man he believed him to be. He was a monster, a butcher, capable of unimaginable atrocities. He squeezed his eyes shut, struggling to reconcile the image of the remorseless rebel leader with the disciplined, dedicated warrior he had witnessed in the Praetorian training exercises. How could one's soul embody such conflicting extremes? His eyes snapped open, his gaze hardening, that he couldn't afford to fixate on the contradictions. He carried a heavy burden of responsibility. He was duty-bound to inform the Emperor. Yet something held him back, a faint whisper of doubt, that a lingering hope that the reports painted an incomplete picture. Perhaps Kale had acted under coercion. Perhaps he had been a pawn in a larger game. Perhaps redemption still glimmered on the horizon. He knew it was a desperate gamble, that he knew the evidence pointed in one unwavering direction. But he couldn't condemn Kale without offering him a chance to speak his truth. His hand reached for the calm, his fingers hovering over the activation rune. He would summon Kale, confront him with the accusations, and demand an explanation. But as he prepared to press the rune, a new alert blazed on his screen. Another dispatch from Theta. He hesitated, then clicked the file open. This report departed from the past. It focused squarely on Kale's present. The document detailed Kale's activities within the Praetorian program. It underscored his exceptional aptitude, his unwavering commitment, and his growing clout among the other aspirants. But it also contained disturbing details, evidence of covert rendezvous, encrypted exchanges, and illicit access to restricted areas. The nauseating wave washed over Valerius. Kale wasn't just a ghost from the past. He was a clear and present danger. He was using the Praetorian program as a smokescreen for something far more insidious. The report suggested Kale intended to leverage his position within the Praetorian Guard to destabilize the Empire, to erode its authority. The thought was too horrific to fully form. Valerius stared blankly at the screen, his mind reeling. He had become so consumed by Kale's past transgressions that he had missed the brewing storm directly in front of him. He had been rendered blind by his own desire for forgiveness, his inherent faith in the possibility of transformation. Now, the truth dawned with chilling clarity. He had unwittingly ushered a serpent into the very heart of the Empire, and that serpent was poised to strike. The encrypted file. The data core's steady thrum was Zara's habitual backdrop, a muted drone against the tempest brewing in her mind. The mess hall, with its boisterous clamor and strained pleasantries, held no appeal. Here, embraced by the pulsing glow of monitors and the endless data streams, she found solace, a sense of purpose. Her assignment, recalibrating the Praetorian cruiser's new energy shielding, usually absorbed her completely, drawing her into a universe of quantum mechanics and intricate code. Today, however, her focus scattered like shrapnel. Valerius's disquiet about Kale had taken root, a nagging irritation she couldn't dismiss. She resisted the notion that Kale posed a genuine threat, as she'd witnessed his movements, his training regimen, his interactions with the newer recruits, a patient weariness intertwined with fierce protection. That he was scarred, undoubtedly, but a danger, a conspirator against the Empire. The idea rang false, a jarring discord in her logical symphony. Yet, Valerius was no simpleton. That he was a man of meticulous precision, of carefully weighed decisions. His concerns demanded examination. Therefore, instead of diving into energy shield calibrations, Zara found herself tracing the convoluted paths within the Praetorian Guard's restricted database. She wasn't hunting directly for evidence against Kale. Rather, she sought context. Information to illuminate Valerius's perspective, data to clarify his sudden unease. She navigated past several security layers with practiced grace, her fingers dancing across the console. It wasn't a love of breaking protocols, but rather a conviction that rules sometimes obscured the larger picture, preventing the connections others overlooked. While sifting through archived mission dossiers, seeking references to the KRYLL sector, she stumbled upon something peculiar, an anomaly that a file labeled Kale understand for record, hidden deep inside a subfolder titled Contingents_Protocols. Her breath hitched. The file boasted robust encryption, utilizing a previously unseen multi-layered algorithm. It was akin to discovering a hidden vault behind a cleverly disguised panel. An insatiable curiosity surged within her. Doubt flickered. This was far beyond her jurisdiction. Decrypting this file constituted a flagrant breach of regulations, a transgression carrying severe repercussions. But the sheer depth of the encryption, its deliberate concealment, ignited her intrigue past the point of resistance. What could be so sensitive about Kale's combat history to warrant such extraordinary protection? Overriding her reservations, she initiated the decryption sequence. Hours dissolved into a singular, focused endeavor. The data core roared as Zara commandeered its processing power to crack the encryption. Lines of code cascaded across her screen, forming mesmerizing patterns that swam before her eyes. The air grew heavy with the metallic tang of ozone. She ignored the insistent pangs of hunger, the ache in her spine, the persistent buzz of her comm unit. Finally, as the first tendrils of dawn painted the viewport a delicate lavender, the last layer of encryption shattered, the file unlocked. Zara blinked, letting her eyes adjust to the sudden flood of data. It was a comprehensive combat chronicle, exhaustively detailing every engagement Kale had fought in, every weapon he had employed, every enemy he had vanquished. She scrolled through the initial entries, noting the standard details: date, location, engagement type, armaments used. Nothing unusual, simply routine entries from a soldier in the Imperial military. Then she arrived at the section titled Confirmed Terminations. The numbers leaped from the screen, branding themselves onto her consciousness. Hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands. The sheer magnitude was staggering, bordering on the impossible. She scrolled further, her fingers trembling slightly. The figures continued to escalate. Each notation was paired with a succinct description of the encounter, a summary of enemy strength, and a threat assessment. She noted engagements against rebel factions, pirate cartels, and rogue AI constructs, all typical for a Praetorian Guard. Then she reached the incidents involving the KRYLL. The descriptions shifted, growing less detached, more raw. The threat assessments were consistently listed as extreme. The summaries spoke of overwhelming numbers, brutal methods, a relentless foe intent on the Empire's annihilation. And then she saw the totals. Adjacent to each KRYLL engagement, the count of confirmed terminations was exponentially higher than anything previously recorded. Hundreds, occasionally thousands, per skirmish. She navigated to the very end of the file, to the final reckoning. A solitary, stark number that echoed in her mind like a death knell. 70,347. 70,347 confirmed kills. Zara stared at the statistic, her thoughts spinning. The figure was incomprehensible, a number that defied all reason. How could one individual be responsible for so much obliteration? A cold dread seeped into her marrow that Valerius's apprehension was justified. This wasn't merely a combat log. It was evidence of a capacity for destruction that was equally terrifying and unfathomable. She scrolled back up the file, concentrating on the KRYLL engagements. The details were scant, but sufficient to reveal a disturbing narrative. The KRYLL were depicted as a remorseless, hive-minded race, motivated by a primal imperative to devour and dominate. They resisted conventional firepower, overwhelming defenses through sheer force of numbers, and Kale had faced them repeatedly, he had stood against the KRYLL tide and prevailed. But at what cost? She glanced back at the number, that chilling, immutable figure that refused to recede. 70,347. Each one a life extinguished. Each one a potential target. She closed the file, her hands unsteady. The data core's hum seemed to taunt her, a constant echo of the information she now possessed. What course of action should she take? She could report her findings to Valerius, corroborate his concerns, and potentially initiate a comprehensive inquiry into Kale's past. But what advantage would that confer? Would it bolster the Empire's security, or would it simply condemn a man who, despite his history, seemed sincerely dedicated to the Empire's service? She considered Kale's reserved nature, his haunted gaze. She recalled his patient guidance through the intricacies of combat simulations, his defense of her when Forlag voiced his prejudice slurs. She recalled the subtle, almost unnoticed acts of kindness he had offered. Could a man capable of such widespread carnage also be capable of genuine transformation? She had no idea. She could expunge the file, erase any indication of her intrusion into the restricted database, pretend she'd never seen it. But the knowledge would linger, a festering secret that would taint her thoughts. She couldn't do that, either. She felt ensnared, torn between her allegiance to the Empire and her burgeoning, not affection, exactly, but something akin to respect for Kale. The burden of the decision weighed heavily, crushing her. She was a scientist, a researcher, a seeker of understanding, not a judge, nor an executioner. But understanding, she realized, was not always a comforting revelation. Sometimes truth served as a weapon, capable of inflicting immeasurable pain. She leaned back in her chair, overcome by fatigue. The first streaks of dawn had yielded to a diffused morning light, illuminating the dust particles pirouetting in the atmosphere. She felt profoundly isolated, lost in a sea of uncertainty. One thing was undeniable. She couldn't disregard this. She couldn't feign ignorance of what she'd unearthed. But how? She would employ this knowledge. How she would harmonize the monster contained within the file with the man she perceived, that remained uncertain. 70,000 souls. Kale's holographic projection flickered, the Imperial Council chamber's volatile atmosphere twisting his image into a grotesque caricature. Valerius, jaw clenched, stared at the dancing numerals. 70,347. He'd perused the data, of course, but its brutal quantification in this sacrosanct space struck him with the force of a physical blow. It felt definitive. Around the polished table, reactions ranged from Grand Moff Forlag's barely concealed glee, the man's corpulent frame practically bursting from his tailored uniform, to the impassive masks of veteran admirals and detached strategists. A dry cough scratched the silence on the chamber's periphery. 70,000. Forlag's voice, thick with malice, resonated in the room. 70,000 KRYL snuffed out by this human anomaly. We embraced him into the Praetorian Guard, empowered him, nurtured his skills. Are we truly drowning in such delusion? A ripple of disquiet pulsed through the assembly, a subtle current of apprehension and doubt. Valerius felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He'd instigated the investigation, driven by an unsettling instinct. Yet this outcome was far from his expectations. He'd anticipated uncovering treason, perhaps clandestine alliances. Instead, this carnage. He was defending humanity, Counselor Alara countered, her voice a soothing balm against Forlag's vitriol. Seated directly opposite him, her tranquil demeanor offered a sharp contrast to his bombastic rage. Alara, a revered matriarch and proponent of diplomacy, frequently served as the voice of calm reason within these tumultuous gatherings, her presence a much-appreciated salve. These were not innocents. The KRYL are an aggressive, expansionist menace. Their forays into settled systems have spawned untold casualties. He mirrored their savagery with equal measure, Forlag retorted, his fist hammering the table like a judge's gavel. Are we to excuse such barbarism simply because it was aimed at a foe? This is the Praetorian Guard, not a motley crew of cells. Words that we champion order and justice, not indiscriminate butchery. Indiscriminate. Alara arched a brow, her gaze piercing. The record indicates each termination was a confirmed combatant, a soldier engaged in hostile action against our colonies. While undeniably extensive, Kale's actions suggest calculating efficiency, not a wanton bloodbath. Efficiency fueled by a corrupt mind. Forlag spat, spraying spittle across the table. He luxuriated in it. I say, observe the statistics. No balanced soul could amass such a sum, but he's a loaded weapon. Counselor, primed to detonate, he poses an existential threat to the Empire's very core. The argument swelled, voices clashing and escalating. Some counselors echoed Forlag's anxieties, expressing concerns about Kale's potential to turn his skills against them. Others, swayed by Alera's measured words, underscored his unwavering loyalty and exceptional service. Valerius remained an observer, a silent witness to the unfolding drama. A growing weight of obligation settled upon him. He had unleashed this tempest. Now he must steer it. He pictured Zara, her initial reservations slowly giving way to a degree of respect for Kale. What occupied her thoughts now? What did she glean from this revelation? We are indulging in conjecture, Alera declared, her voice cutting through the din like a laser. We are allowing paranoia and bias to taint our judgment. Kale has been a reliable asset. He has proven his commitment to the Empire countless times. Before we condemn him based on accounts from the past, we must examine the circumstances, the larger picture, and, above all, his present conduct. She paused, her eyes sweeping the room. I propose a meticulous psychological evaluation, an in-depth exploration of his motives, his convictions, his mental state. We must comprehend the individual lurking behind the figures, not simply react to the figures themselves. Forlag scoffed derisively. A psychological probing. Are you proposing we mollycoddle him? Excuse his deeds with some imagined trauma. He extinguished 70,000 lives. Counselor, he needs censure, not a therapist. Censure. The word hung in the air, freighted with ominous portent. A frigid dread seeped into Valerius's core that he hadn't envisioned this as a possibility. He had merely sought answers, clarity. Now, a soldier's life, a man he had grown to admire, teetered on the precipice. We must proceed deliberately, Alera insisted, her voice resolute. We cannot afford to make an impetuous choice born of fear. The fallout could be catastrophic. We must assemble all evidence, dissect the data, and only then can we determine the appropriate course of action. The debate raged on, fueled by apprehension, suspicion, and a desperate yearning for control. Valerius watched, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. He understood that the debate's outcome would dictate not only Kale's destiny, but also the future trajectory of the Praetorian Guard, indeed the Empire itself. Were they truly so blind? He couldn't exorcise the image of Kale, the unyielding warrior who had pulled him from the jaws of death during the KRYLL invasion. Was he actually a monster, veiled beneath a veneer of allegiance? Or was he a survivor, scarred by conflict, striving for atonement? Valerius understood that the answer was far more intricate than a mere chronicle of kills could reveal. The meeting dissolved into disarray. With no definitive resolution, Valerius approached Alera. Counselor, he began, his voice hushed. Thank you for advocating on his behalf. Yet, I must confess, these figures remain unsettling. Alera sighed, her eyes reflecting the weight of her burdens. I understand, Valerius. They are profoundly disturbing. But numbers alone cannot define a person. We must delve deeper, beyond the superficial, to truly grasp the man. What if the findings are less than pleasing? Valerius inquired, his voice barely audible. Alera placed a firm hand on his arm, her touch surprisingly strong. Then we must steel ourselves to make difficult decisions. But those decisions must be sculpted by reason, not fear, shaped by justice, not prejudice. She paused, her gaze locking on his. Remember, Valerius, the Empire rests upon a foundation of order and justice. If we forsake those principles, we risk transforming into the very darkness we claim to oppose. Valerius nodded, his mind a tangle of thoughts. He acknowledged the wisdom in Alera's words, but the weight of responsibility pressed down more heavily than ever. He had opened a dangerous door, and he must now grapple with the repercussions. Later, Valerius found himself gazing out from his quarters at the distant stars that sprinkled the inky abyss. Kale, training relentlessly in the simulator, movements precise and lethal, filled his thoughts. He thought of Zara, hunched over data files, hunting for answers, and he thought of the KRYLL, the alien menace that had molded Kale's life and threatened to engulf the Empire. The galaxy was a treacherous expanse, riddled with uncertainty and trepidation. And at its center stood Kale, a warrior with a past obscured in shadow, a future suspended in limbo. Was he a weapon to be feared, or a bulwark to be trusted? The answer, Valerius knew, would determine their collective destiny that he activated his calm. Contacting Zara. "I need to meet," he said, urgency lacing his tone. "There's something you must know." The calm crackled to life, and Zara's voice, sharp and businesslike, responded. "I'm already en route." He could detect the faint whine of a speeder approaching, and Valerius steeled his resolve. He sensed this was just the prelude that a storm was brewing, with Kale directly in the eye of it, that a question of loyalty. Censure, Forelag had spat. The word, a venomous barb, still stung Valerius. Exile, even execution. Such pronouncements had branded his conscience. Opening that Pandora's box now had the Imperial Council consumed by internal strife. Again, Valerius stood before them, the glacial marble of the floor a stark contrast to the heat rising in his face. Expectation hung heavy, each counselor's stare a calculating probe that he moistened his lips, the small sound booming in the cavernous space. "Esteemed counselors," he began, his tone firm despite the tempest within. "I acknowledge the severity of the intelligence regarding Praetorian Kale. The statistics are grave that I beseech you, however, to consider the backdrop, the conditions precipitating those actions." A derisive snort from Forelag cut through the air like a shard of ice. Context? He extinguished 70,000 lives. What extenuating circumstances could possibly excuse such inhumanity? The KRYLL were not blameless innocents, Grand Moff. Valerius retorted, meeting Forelag's icy glare. They represented a clear and present danger to Imperial dominion in the Outer Rim. Kale, at the time, was a rebel leader, championing his people, however misguided his methods appear in retrospect. Counselor Alara, her brow furrowed in thought, broke in. "And now he serves our banner. Since joining the Praetorian Guard, he has displayed remarkable prowess and steadfast devotion. Is it beyond the realm of possibility that he aspires to atone for his past transgressions, to wield his talents for the collective betterment?" "Atonement is a privilege we cannot indulge, Counselor," Forelag snapped. "The Empire dare not be perceived as condoning such brutality, irrespective of an individual's purported intentions, that we court the risk of alienating allies, fomenting rebellion amongst our tributaries." Valerius suppressed a sigh. Forelag's fear-mongering was a potent weapon, exploiting the Council's fear of losing control that he needed to redefine the argument, propose a solution that addressed their anxieties while safeguarding a potentially invaluable asset. "I submit a different course," Valerius declared, his voice ringing with assurance. "Rather than immediate censure, I propose a thorough psychological assessment and a battery of stringent loyalty probes, overseen by the foremost experts the Empire has to offer. Let us ascertain, beyond any doubt, the locus of Kale's true allegiance." A ripple of murmurs spread through the assembled counselors. This was a deviation from accepted Imperial practice, a calculated risk. It was one he was prepared to take. And should these probes reveal Kale to be an enduring menace? Forelag pressed, his eyes mere slits. "What then? Valerius, will you shoulder the responsibility for the ensuing fallout?" "I accept complete accountability," Valerius affirmed, his voice unwavering. "If Kale presents a danger to the Empire, I will be the first to advocate for his removal. But certainty is paramount that we cannot afford to discard potential based solely on past deeds." The Council deliberated for what stretched into an eternity, their voices swelling and receding in a tempest of points and counterpoints. Ultimately, after arduous debate, a vote was called. The outcome was tight. Yet Valerius's proposition prevailed. He released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, relief swiftly yielding to trepidation. He had bought Kale precious time, but now he faced the onus of delivering. He had to demonstrate that Kale was not a latent monster poised to tear the Empire asunder. His immediate destination was Sector General on Corvus Prime, the expansive medical and research hub renowned for its bleeding-edge technology and its equally brilliant, if eccentric, cadre of specialists. He needed someone capable of not only devising and administering the psychological evaluations, but also interpreting the results with an impartiality that Forlag and his supporters could not easily undermine. Dr. Eris Thorne, chief of psychological profiling, fit the bill. Thorne was a luminary in his field, celebrated for his unconventional methods and his uncanny ability to dissect the intricate architecture of the mind. He also possessed a healthy irreverence for imperial red tape, which, in Valerius's estimation, was a decided advantage. Thorne's office was a vibrant chaos of datapad stacks, neural scanners, and anatomical renderings. The air vibrated with the subtle thrum of advanced technology. Thorne himself was a sinewy figure with a wild mane of silver hair and eyes that seemed to penetrate to the very core of your being. Valerius, Thorne acknowledged, barely sparing a glance from the holographic projection he was manipulating. To what do I owe this visit? Surely you haven't suddenly acquired a fondness for my rather specialized area? The matter involves Praetorian Kale, Valerius stated, dispensing with pleasantries. The Council has sanctioned a thorough psychological evaluation, and I require your oversight. Thorne's fingers froze on the holographic controls. He pivoted, his stare intense. Kale, you say? The KRYLL Slayer? Intriguing that I've perused your report. Tell me, Valerius, what quality in this man justifies such leniency? Valerius recounted the circumstances, delineating the Council's apprehensions and his own conviction that Kale possessed untapped potential for service to the Empire. He stressed the imperative for a scrupulous and unbiased appraisal. Thorne listened attentively, his expression enigmatic. Once Valerius had concluded, he steepled his fingers, his eyes narrowing in contemplation. Intriguing, he pondered. A warrior tormented by his history, seeking absolution within the very structure he once opposed. The potential for discord is delectable. Valerius resisted the urge to roll his eyes. Thorne's zeal was simultaneously reassuring and unsettling. So, you're agreeable? He inquired. Oh, I wouldn't miss this for all the star systems in the galaxy, Thorne responded, a spark igniting in his eyes. However, I'll require unrestricted access. Valerius, no limitations, no interference that I intend to plumb the deepest recesses of this man's psyche. Valerius nodded. Agreed that I'll ensure you are provided with every necessary resource. Excellent, Thorne affirmed, already returning to his holographic display. Now, let's commence devising some trials that we must push him to his breaking point, to expose what lies dormant beneath that impassive mask. The planning sessions with Thorne unfolded as a dizzying torrent of theoretical models, ethical considerations, and technological innovations. Thorne advocated a multi-pronged strategy, marrying conventional psychological assessments with state-of-the-art virtual reality simulations designed to gauge Kale's responses under unrelenting pressure. We'll confront him with his specters, Thorne elaborated, pacing the floor like a captive beast. Recreate the battles, the agonizing choices, the moments of excess that will dissect his reactions, his rationalizations that will unearth whether he harbors true remorse or merely regrets apprehension. A knot of apprehension tightened in Valerius's gut. Exhuming Kale's past would be agonizing, potentially destabilizing. He understood, however, that it was unavoidable. Utmost certainty was paramount regarding Kale's essential nature. Alongside the psychological analysis, Valerius also commissioned a series of fidelity tests designed to assess Kale's dedication to the Empire. These evaluations were more practical, encompassing simulated combat scenarios, strategic decision-making exercises, and even covert assignments designed to expose any latent disloyalty. He recognized the inherent risks, the potential for these tests to backfire spectacularly. He remained convinced that Kale was worth the gamble. He had glimpsed the potential for good within the man, the authentic yearning to atone. That he refused to entertain the notion that Kale was simply a monster masquerading in imperial garb. As preparations for the evaluations and trials accelerated, Valerius found himself progressively consumed by the task. He devoured historical accounts of the KRYL War, striving to grasp the context of Kale's actions. He conferred with former insurgents who had fought at Kale's side, gleaning insights into his character and motivations. He even devoted time to observing Kale during his training exercises, scrutinizing his movements, his expressions, his interactions with fellow guardsmen. The more he unearthed about Kale, the more intricate and paradoxical he appeared. He was an accomplished warrior, a brilliant tactician, a born leader. He was also a profoundly troubled figure, haunted by his past, struggling to reconcile past deeds with his present role. Valerius commenced viewing Kale not as a fiend, but as a casualty of circumstance, a product of a brutal and unforgiving conflict. He had been compelled to make impossible sacrifices, to perpetrate unspeakable acts, to ensure survival. Now, he sought to rebuild his life, to discover purpose in a galaxy that had offered little but anguish. Valerius acknowledged that he was venturing into perilous territory, jeopardizing his own reputation and career. He was convinced that Kale was worthy of fighting for. He believed in the possibility of redemption for all, even those who had committed the most heinous crimes. He was resolute in his determination to prove to the Council, to Forlag, to the entirety of the Empire, that Kale was not an existential threat, but a valuable asset, a contributing member of the Praetorian Guard capable of protecting the very structure he had once sought to dismantle. He could only pray that he wasn't tragically wrong. Kale's fate, and perhaps the stability of the Empire itself, rested on his shoulders. The weight of that responsibility was nearly crushing. Mirrors of the past. The antiseptic chamber droned, a low-frequency hum that resonated deep within Kale's sternum. Not merely his ears. He stood upon a stark platform, the polished circlet of the neural interface gleaming against his scalp. Dr. Thorne, a cadaverous figure whose gaze felt like an invasive procedure, offered a clipped nod. Scenario 1. KRYLL Assault. Survival is paramount. Then, oblivion. A screeching maelstrom ripped through the void. The air grew dense, saturated with the sickly sweet stench of damp carapace and electrically charged air. Xylos. His boots sank into clinging mire. A sensory onslaught, one he hadn't weathered since relinquishing his freedom to the Empire, hoping the rigid structure would bury the past. Duty, he'd hoped, was a sturdy coffin for ghosts. But memories were stubborn specters. The KRYLL materialized from the dense undergrowth, grotesque. Arthropods brandishing honed mandibles and predatory eyes blazing with ravenous intent. Instinctively, his Praetorian training took hold, a discordant harmony against the tremor of rising panic. Plasma rifle raised, he unleashed searing bolts, incinerating the vanguard. Still, they surged forward, an unyielding tide of clicking appendages and guttural snarls. This was no mere simulation. It was a visceral resurrection. That he tasted the acrid burn of their corrosive spray, felt the sickening give as his blade cleaved through chitinous armor. Each kill reverberated, a dissonant note in the brutal symphony he'd striven to mute. He fought with a desperate fervor, battling not only the simulation but the suffocating weight of what he had been. Sharp as shattered glass, the screams of villagers sworn to protection echoed. The gaunt faces of fallen comrades materialized. The bone-deep fatigue that had threatened to drown him surged back. He relived the ruthless calculus, the soul-staining compromises. The exercise intensified, the scene dissolved, reforming into the besieged command post. Ground zero for his most agonizing decision, the one that clung to him like a second skin. KRYL flooded through breached defenses, overwhelming the remaining soldiers. He saw crude digital avatars of his rebels, their virtual faces locked in rictus grins of fear. His own voice, younger, harsher, a battle cry ripped from his throat, echoed. Hold the line. No surrender. For freedom. The impossible choice loomed again. The chilling arithmetic of survival. The logic that had deemed one unit expendable. He had signed their death warrants. The simulated slaughter played out before him, their digital forms ripped asunder by the ravenous horde. Guilt, an unwelcome shadow, snaked around him. His heart hammered a frantic rhythm, breath sawing in his lungs. The simulation aimed to shatter him. To expose the monster he feared still lay dormant. He fought the urge to scream, to unleash blind destruction. He clamped down on it, focusing on the familiar heft of the plasma rifle, the imperial crest emblazoned on his chest. He was a Praetorian now. That he was altered. He must be. He forced his mind to analyze, to dissect the KRL's tactics, to identify vulnerabilities. He weaponized the simulated environment, laying traps, creating killing zones, maximizing his firepower. Slowly, agonizingly, the momentum shifted. The simulation evaporated abruptly. The oppressive darkness lifted, replaced by the clinical white of the lab that he stood there, gasping, perspiration gluing his hair to his brow. His hands trembled like frightened birds. Thorn's voice, flat and affectless, sliced the silence. Scenario 1 complete. Transitioning to Scenario 2. Ethical crossroads. Cale steeled himself. This, he understood, was merely the overture. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. On the transport ship, Zara scrutinized the spiraling data streams, her brow furrowed with concern. Her summons to the Citadel by Valerius, and the information regarding Cale's evaluation, had hit her harder than she would admit. Dr. Thorne's assessment was unsettling. Cale's physiological readings during the KRLL combat were volcanic. His heart hammered, adrenaline coursed, and his brain displayed activity patterns resonant with acute stress and trauma. But the most alarming spike occurred in the amygdala, the seat of fear, and the prefrontal cortex, the center of judgment, coinciding with the besieged command post-recreation. It pointed to a stark internal conflict, a war waged between instinct and rationality. She was aware of Cale's brutal history. Valerius had divulged classified reports, the casualty logs, the harrowing details of his insurgent campaigns. Yet, seeing it etched in the cold data of his brain activity was unnerving. It solidified the abstraction of horror, and it stirred doubt. Had she been seduced by his charisma, his proficiency, his guarded intensity? Had she painted a romanticized portrait? Ignoring the lurking darkness, she scrolled, seeking a glimmer of hope, a testament to his capacity for change. She found it in the latter half of the exercise. Following the initial distress, he'd wrested back control, recalibrating his approach, leveraging his intellect to turn back the KRYLL tide. He hadn't succumbed to mindless rage or despair. He had counterattacked, with both body and mind, strategically. A mere spark in the void. Yet it gave her reason to pause. It suggested that Cale was not simply a soulless instrument of war. He was a resilient being, capable of learning, adapting, evolving. The question was, could he truly outrun his past? The transport lurched as it docked at the Citadel. Zara grabbed her datapad, smoothed her uniform, and braced herself for whatever awaited. She resolved to see Cale clearly, not as the monster the Empire feared, but as he genuinely was. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Back in the lab, Cale confronted Scenario 2. Ethical crossroads. Before him, a holographic projection of a conflagrant village flickered. Screams pierced the air. A woman, terror etched on her visage, cradled a child. A KRYLL, mandibles glistening with something, loomed over them. Your directive, Thorne's voice droned, is to eliminate the KRYLL threat and secure the village. Cale reacted instantly. He raised the plasma rifle, targeting the alien. But before he could fire, the woman shrieked, "No! You'll hit us!" He paused, finger hovering over the trigger. He could risk the shot. The odds favored him. He was a marksman of repute, but a slim chance remained. He could miss, killing the woman, the child. The simulation offered stark choices, displayed on a holographic screen. Asterisk Option A. Take the shot. Accept potential civilian casualties. Option B. Execute flanking maneuver. Increased personal risk. Option C. Initiate orbital strike. Guaranteed KRYLL annihilation, but also village destruction. Asterisk. Each scenario echoed past decisions. Choices that had cost innocent lives. Choices that haunted his waking hours. He squeezed his eyes shut, attempting to mute the screams, the blaze, the burden of his legacy. He inhaled deeply and opened them. I choose. He wavered, paralyzed by the crushing weight. The simulation morphed again. This time, a medical bay. A soldier lay prone on a cot, pale and gaunt, clinging to life. This soldier requires immediate medical attention, Thorne said. You possess enough supplies for one individual. Another soldier, vital to mission success, is also critically wounded. The options appeared. Asterisk Option A. Treat wounded soldier. Low probability of survival, but will alleviate suffering. Option B. Treat crucial soldier. High probability of survival and will significantly enhance mission outcome. Option C. Administer lethal medication to wounded soldier, ending suffering and freeing resources for crucial soldier. Asterisk. Kale recoiled. The third option was anathema that he could never. But the specter of the battlefield rose, countless soldiers succumbing to agony that he remembered the desperate pleas, the scarce resources, the impossible choices levied upon him. He turned to the holographic patient, his face contorted in pain. He visualized his own comrades, the ones he had failed. He remembered the woman and her child in the burning village that he knew the course he must take. He made his selection. The scenarios relentlessly continued, each more demanding, more emotionally taxing than the last. He confronted impossible dilemmas, agonizing decisions, situations crafted to break him. He was forced to exhume his history, his failings, his deepest fears. He lost all sense of time within the sterile white prison, but he knew only that he was being tested, judged, analyzed, and that his fate, his very existence, hung suspended. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Zara located Valerius in his office, where dim light cast elongated shadows across his face. He appeared weary, aged beyond her reckoning. "How is he faring?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Valerius sighed heavily. "Early reports are complicated. Thorn is pushing boundaries that he is eliciting reactions that haven't been seen yet." "What sort of reactions?" "Regret, remorse, and control that he is combating it. Zara, he is confronting his demons, but I am uncertain if it will be enough." He turned to face her, his gaze laced with a mixture of anticipation and despair. "We wagered heavily, Zara, terribly so, and I am starting to question our judgment." "We must trust the process," Zara responded, her conviction wavering. "We must hold faith that Kale is capable of transformation." Valerius shook his head. "Faith alone is insufficient, Zara. We require confirmation. And currently, the only confirmation we possess is a kill tally of 70,000 and a mind haunted by the echoes of conflict." Zara stared at him, her heart weighed down. "What transpires if he falters?" Valerius gazed out the window, his eyes fixed on distant stars. "Then the Empire will have to contend with a supremely dangerous entity, and I will have failed." The weight of restraint. The chamber resonated with a low, persistent drone, a sonic massage that vibrated Kale to his core. That he was adrift, suspended within the viscous, life-sustaining fluid, his mind the unwilling arena for the Empire's final, most insidious trial. This wasn't a contest of strength or strategy. It was a plunge into the deepest abyss of his spirit. Memories surfaced like grotesque specters, the ravaged landscapes of his rebellion, the spectral faces of fallen allies, the echo of agonizing screams he'd been powerless to prevent. The simulations did more than simply replay past events. They warped them, intensifying the agony, painting every regret with layers of fresh guilt. He witnessed a younger, more headstrong version of himself, issuing orders, making impossible choices, each one a blemish upon his conscience. Point one scenario dropped him into a besieged village. KRYL raiders descending like a plague of insects. He was charged with the village's defense, yet the scenario was meticulously designed for failure. Every avenue led to ruin. Every decision resulted in unspeakable horror. Slaughtering the KRYL meant villagers caught in the crossfire. Evacuating the innocents invited a brutal hunt. His reflexes screamed for carnage, for the ruthless efficiency that had once defined him. But something restrained him. The villagers' faces, their pleas, the raw terror in their eyes. They were a mirror reflecting the innocence he had lost. This wasn't a battle. It was a crucible, that a test of his ability to see inherent worth. Even in the face of consuming darkness, he shifted his approach. Abandoning aggression, he resisted the urge to fight his way free. Instead, he channeled his focus into safeguarding the most vulnerable, erecting makeshift barricades, utilizing his tactical knowledge not for destruction, but for delay, for misdirection. That he meticulously doled out the dwindling provisions, offering solace and encouragement. Fully aware of their impending doom, the simulation tightened its grip. The KRYL grew emboldened, their strikes more ferocious. He could feel the searing blast of their flamethrowers, inhale the nauseating reek of burning human flesh. Still, he He stood firm, resisting the primal urge to lash out. He would not morph into the monster they expected. As the final refuge crumbled and the KRYLL swarmed, he made an unexpected move that he stepped forward, defenseless, offering himself as collateral. A desperate gamble, a long shot. Yet it was the sole course of action that might grant the villagers a few fleeting moments of reprieve. The simulation ended. Kale gasped, his frame convulsing, his mind reeling from the ordeal. He was depleted, utterly spent, yet oddly serene that he had confronted his demons and, in some measure, conquered them. Across the observation gallery, Valerius scrutinized the data streams, a blend of disbelief and guarded hope warring within him. The psychological assessments, the biometric readings, they presented a portrait that defied expectation. Kale hadn't shattered, he hadn't succumbed to fury or despair. Instead, he had displayed an almost unsettling degree of control, empathy, and even selfless devotion. Impossible, Valerius murmured, running a weary hand through his thinning hair. The casualty rate alone, it should have broken his spirit, transformed him into a mindless killing machine. A technician approached, his features etched with bewilderment. Sir, the findings are consistent across all scenarios. Subject Kale consistently prioritizes the safeguarding of life, even at his own peril. Valerius studied the data, his mind struggling to reconcile the evidence before him with the image he'd cultivated of Kale. Could this be true? Was the barbarian, the butcher, truly capable of transformation? Or was this an elaborate charade, a meticulously crafted deception designed to lull the Empire into complacency? The question lingered, heavy and unresolved. The data was presented before the Imperial Council, the atmosphere permeated with trepidation. Councillor Forlag, his face a rigid mask of disapproval, was the first to speak. I cautioned you, he hissed, his tone laden with disdain. This is a perilous venture. We are toying with a volatile force, and we will suffer for it. Councillor Alara, her gaze bright with compassion, offered a counterpoint to Forlag's venom. The data suggests otherwise. Forlag, Kale has exhibited an aptitude for empathy and self-control that is quite extraordinary, given his history. Self-control? Forlag scoffed. He has butchered legions. Do you genuinely believe he has reformed? That he is not simply lying in wait, anticipating an opportunity to strike? We cannot pass judgment on him solely based on past deeds, Alara countered, her voice measured yet firm. We must also consider his present conduct, his demonstrated capacity for evolution. We must afford him the chance to prove his new self. The debate raged, the council torn between dread and optimism, caught between the yearning for security and the promise of redemption. Ultimately, they reached a compromise. Kale would be assigned a non-combat position, focusing on guidance and cultivation. He would be under constant supervision, his every action scrutinized. Yet he would be granted an opportunity. Valerius, present for the council's deliberations, experienced a wave of relief. He had prepared himself for the worst, anticipating that the council would brand Kale a menace and order his immediate termination. But they hadn't. They had offered him a chance to demonstrate his worth, to atone for the past, to evolve into something beyond a weapon. He located Kale on the training grounds, practicing forms with a wooden staff. The movements were seamless, precise, almost balletic. His face held a serenity, a quiet concentration Valerius had not witnessed before. The council has reached its verdict, Valerius announced, approaching Kale. Kale ceased his movements, his expression inscrutable. And you will be assigned to a training role. You will assist in shaping the next generation of Praetorian Guards. Kale offered a slow nod. Processing the information, he seemed neither surprised, nor relieved, nor even disappointed. Simply accepting. I understand, he said at last. This is your opportunity, Kale, Valerius said, his voice filled with sincerity. An opportunity to channel your skills for good, to atone for past transgressions. Kale met his gaze, his eyes intense. The past is an ever-present companion, Valerius. There is no escaping it. Perhaps not, Valerius conceded. But you can determine how it defines you. You can allow it to consume you, or you can mold it into a better future. Kale remained silent for a long moment, his gaze directed towards the distant skyline. Then, He pivoted back to Valerius, a faint spark of something resembling hope in his eyes. "I will try," he said. "I will strive to be worthy of this trust." Valerius clapped him on the shoulder, a rare display of warmth. "I believe you will. Kale. I believe you will succeed." As Valerius departed, he couldn't shake the premonition that they were both treading a precarious path, that Kale's redemption remained uncertain. He was still a volatile entity, a living contradiction of savagery and empathy. But for the first time, Valerius dared to entertain the possibility that Kale might find inner peace. And in finding that peace, perhaps the Empire might find some as well. The burden of self-control, it seemed, was heavy, but not insurmountable. Seeds of discord. Forlag's glass pulsed with imprisoned crimson. The energy field, a silent warden against gravity's pull. He loathed these covert gatherings, the sidelong looks, the muffled anxieties that saturated the very atmosphere. Yet, the menace Kale embodied made them a necessity. "A serpent nestled amongst us," Forlag grated, the sound barely audible above the subtle synth wash of his private chambers. Across the gleaming table, Counselor Lyra, whose political mind was as meticulously crafted as her uniform, offered a measured nod. Beside her, Commander Rexus, a colossal figure whose fealty Forlag had painstakingly nurtured, remained a stoic monument. "The Council appears swayed by his transformation," Lyra offered, her tone carefully calibrated. "The psych evaluations were persuasive." Forlag snorted, a brittle, dismissive sound. "Persuasive theater, that he's a butcher." Lyra points 70,000 lives. "Does anyone truly believe that can be simply expunged, cleansed with a few fabricated scenarios?" He set the glass down with force, the red fluid nearly breaching the rim. "He's manipulating them, manipulating all of you." Rexus finally stirred, his voice a resonant depth charge. "The simulations revealed genuine compassion, a readiness for self-sacrifice." Forlag rounded on him, eyes ablaze. "Compassion? Sacrifice? Luxuries we can ill afford when the KRYLL threaten. He's a wolf draped in wool, Commander, and when the KRYLL come clawing at our defenses, those true fangs will emerge. That he'll betray us. You have my word." He traversed the room, the impact of his boots echoing on the polished expanse. The space was a testament to his career, adorned with relics of imperial service. Yet tonight, it felt like a gilded cage. "Unease is brewing amongst the populace," Lyra observed, her voice even. "Murmurs are spreading. They recall his history. They see him shaping our soldiers. The dread is unmistakable." "Good," Forlag replied, a bleak satisfaction infusing his tone. "Terror is potent. We must nurture that fear, stoke the embers of doubt until they blaze." He halted, turning back to the table. "Lyra, I require you to disseminate certain facts to the HoloNet. Highlight the sheer brutality of his past actions, the immense scale of the devastation. Reinforce the rebel philosophies he once championed, philosophies that almost toppled the very empire." Lyra demurred. "That could be interpreted as insubordination, General, undermining the Council's stance." "Let them interpret it," Forlag countered, his voice hardening. "The Empire's survival outweighs petty bureaucracy. And Rexus," he addressed the commander, "you are to subtly observe Kale's movements, his affiliations, his training methodologies. Seek any sign of dissidence, any echo of his former rebelliousness." Rexus nodded, his expression a study in impassivity. "Understood, General." A spark of solace flickered within Forlag that he wasn't alone in this. Others perceived the danger, grasped the threat Kale posed, that he must act decisively before Kale could cement his position, before the Council became irrevocably blinded by their misguided belief in his reformation. Later, isolated in his quarters, Forlag scrutinized the data streams cascading across his personal console. Reports from his network, HoloNet updates, security protocols. He was consumed, driven by a primal aversion to the other. The KRYLL had left indelible scars. He had witnessed their barbarity firsthand during the border skirmishes. He knew the extent of their devastation, and he detected a similar darkness within Kale. His gaze snagged on a HoloNet item, a concocted piece orchestrated by Lyra's contacts. It emphasized Kale's body count, accompanied by macabre, AI-generated renderings depicting the aftermath of conflict. The comments section seethed with panic and resentment. Excellent. The seed had taken root, but it wasn't enough. He craved concrete proof of Kale's perfidy, something that would shatter the illusion of redemption and reveal the monster beneath. His fingers danced across the console, summoning archived records, classified intelligence briefings. He sought a particular element, something buried deep within the Empire's vast databanks. Something that would directly tie Kale to the KRYLL. He understood it was a gamble, a desperate reach, but he was compelled to try. The fate of the Empire, he firmly believed, hinged upon it. Days bled into weeks. Forlag grew increasingly withdrawn, consumed by his fixation that he neglected his obligations, alienated his staff. His paranoia taking root, he sensed Kale's influence everywhere, a subtle corruption permeating the very core of the Empire. One evening, poring over Rex's surveillance logs, a peculiar detail arrested his attention: that a seemingly insignificant exchange between Kale and a junior technician within the engineering corps. The technician, a recent transfer from a neglected Outer Rim planet, possessed a history of questionable affiliations, allegiances that, upon deeper examination, hinted at KRYLL sympathizers. Forlag's pulse quickened. Could this be it? A link? A thread he could unravel to expose Kale's deception? He instructed Rexus to secure the technician for interrogation. He would preside personally. He wanted to witness the fear in the technician's gaze, to extract the truth. The interrogation was relentless. Forlag grilled the technician without mercy, his voice dripping venom, his questioning designed to erode his defenses. The technician initially denied any connection to Kale, any awareness of KRYLL machinations. But Forlag pressed on, his gaze burning with intensity. Finally, the technician yielded. He confessed to a brief dialogue with Kale regarding repairs to a training simulator. He alleged Kale had inquired about the specifications of certain components. A device used to emulate KRYLL weaponry. It was a flimsy lead, tenuous at best, but Forlag seized upon it, distorting it, amplifying it, crafting it into a narrative of treachery and treason. He presented his interpretation to Lyra and Rexus, his voice ringing with righteous fury. He's planning something, Forlag insisted. He's exploiting the training simulations to set a trap for our soldiers. He's collaborating with the KRYLL. Lyra looked unconvinced. The evidence is circumstantial, General. It's insufficient to warrant drastic action. Drastic action is precisely what is required. Forlag roared, striking the table. We cannot afford to hesitate until it's too late. We must neutralize him before he executes his scheme. Rexus remained silent, his face betraying uncertainty. Doubts were creeping in. Forlag's obsession bordered on mania. Yet his loyalty endured. That he still held the general's judgment in esteem. Forlag, detecting Rexus' wavering resolve, played his final hand. That he revealed the HoloNet item, the fabricated visuals, the wave of apprehension and outrage emanating from the public. The people demand action, Forlag stated, his tone low and ominous. They recognize the threat. They understand the danger. If we fail to act, they will lose faith. They will turn on us. Lyra and Rexus exchanged a nervous glance. They were aware of Forlag's accuracy. Public sentiment was a formidable force, and it was rapidly turning against Kale. What do you propose, General? Lyra asked softly. Forlag leaned forward, his eyes sparkling with a dark intensity. We must apprehend him. Publicly, we must expose his treachery. We must issue a statement to the KRYLL and to any who dare challenge the Empire. He paused, savoring the climax. They were convinced he had prevailed. He was about to unleash a storm of retribution upon Kale, a tempest that would destroy his image and condemn him to oblivion. Yet, even in his moment of triumph, a seed of doubt sprouted within. Was his path the correct one? Was he truly safeguarding the Empire, or merely succumbing to personal dread and suspicion? Was Kale a traitor, or a victim of circumstance, a pawn in some larger conflict? Forlag dismissed the hesitation. He could not afford to question his motivations. That he must act. He must protect the Empire, regardless of the price, even if it meant condemning an innocent man. Discord was sown, and the harvest would begin. At a twisted truth. Forlag, a hunched gargoyle illuminated by the holoscreen's toxic glow, hadn't known restful sleep in cycles. CF was his only companion in a feverish quest to ruin Kale. The escalating KRYLL border skirmishes, detailed in ignored reports, were secondary to his obsession with the human. The screen displayed Kale's combat record, a document that had become Forlag's canvas of deceit. He had meticulously warped each entry, excising context, burying acts of compassion. The already impressive kill count, ballooned with phantom collateral damage, all laid at Kale's bloody feet. The clinical language of official reports had been supplanted with visceral accounts of battlefield horror, wording chosen to ignite primeval terror and revulsion. Calculated precision became butchery. Targeted removal twisted into unleashed devastation. A diffident cough broke the silence. Forlag didn't glance up. "What is it, Lieutenant?" he snapped, his voice roughened. Lieutenant Groff, a fresh-faced officer, entered hesitantly, a trembling datapad in his grasp. "General, the KRYLL, a major incursion at Outpost 7. We require authorization to activate the enhanced defense net." Forlag waved him off. "Later, Groff. This is paramount." He indicated the screen, eyes alight with manic energy. "The Empire's very survival hinges on it. Something you wouldn't comprehend." Groff's Adam's apple danced as he swallowed. "But, General, the outpost, it's collapsing. Lives are at stake. And the millions who might perish if Kale turns against us." Forlag retorted, finally fixing the lieutenant with a wild stare, pupils blown wide. "A single outpost is a sacrifice I'm willing to make. Now, leave me to my work." Visibly shaken, Groff saluted, retreating silently. Forlag barely noted his exit. He turned back to the screen, his fingers hovering over the send command. This was it, the culmination of weeks of relentless manipulation. Bypassing protocol, he'd employed encrypted channels and backdoors forged during his tenure in Imperial intelligence. The falsified record would be broadcast directly to key news outlets, circumventing the Council's censors for maximum impact. That a final, venomous smirk twisted Forlag's lips as he pressed the button. The data packet, a digital ASP, launched into the Empire's nervous system. Within hours, the fabricated narrative began to take root. Sensational headlines screamed from every news feed. "The Butcher of Xantus, a killer among U.S. and Empire shelters, a war criminal." The carefully selected vocabulary, the graphic descriptions, the inflated body count, it all functioned exactly as Forlag intended. Diane Air Shada Cantina, choked with the scent of spice and desperation, a scarred veteran spat on the floor after skimming a news snippet on his wrist-mounted datapad. 70,000. By the void, that's more than the entire KRYLL war party on Beta Prime. And they inducted this fiend into the Guard. On Coruscant, in the Senate's gilded chambers, Counselor Lyra gasped, scrolling through the report. The alleged atrocities were breathtaking in their scope. Doubt, once suppressed, blossomed into full-blown disbelief. Had she misjudged Kale? Had his earnestness masked something sinister? On a tranquil agricultural world, a farmer paused his work, his gaze fixed on the newsfeed projected onto his tractor. His children played nearby, their joyful cries filling the air. He pictured Kale, this butcher, descending on his haven, bringing fire and ruin to his family. A chilling premonition gripped him. Misinformation spiraled, fueled by social media and fear-mongering pundits. Hollow vids of Kale's battles, twisted to depict him as a bloodthirsty savage, went viral. Comment sections surged with fury and demands for retribution. Demonstrations erupted outside the Senate, the crowds chanting, "Deport the Butcher," and "Empire first, humans last." The carefully constructed image of the Galactic Empire as a paragon of peace and justice was shattering, replaced by a volatile brew of anxiety, xenophobia, and self-righteous rage. From his darkened office, Forlag watched the tempest unfold with grim satisfaction. He was safeguarding the Empire, even if they were too blind to see it. The insidious tendrils of the propaganda reached even the Praetorian Guard. Tensions simmered in the barracks. Guardsmen, previously respectful of Kale, now regarded him with suspicion and discomfort. Whispers trailed him down the corridors. His meals were taken in oppressive silence, camaraderie replaced by a palpable cold. Even Commander Rexus, outwardly composed, struggled to reconcile the Kale he knew with the monster painted in the news feeds. He scrutinized past conversations, searching for hidden currents, for hints of the depravity Forlag claimed lay concealed. The psychological toll was immense. The relentless onslaught of negativity, the pervasive unease, the insidious murmurs, they chipped away at the Empire's very bedrock. Trust evaporated, replaced by suspicion and paranoia. Neighbors turned against neighbors, comrades against comrades. The once united Empire was now fractured and vulnerable, ripe for exploitation. Forlag remained unmoved. He saw the bedlam not as a tragedy, but as a necessary cauterization. The infection had to be excised, regardless of the pain. That he was a surgeon wielding a laser scalpel, removing a cancerous growth. That he ignored his staff's pleas to address the KRYLL incursions, dismissing them as trivial irritations. That he brushed aside reports of escalating crime and civil unrest, attributing them to the transient discomfort stemming from the Kale controversy. His entire focus remained on Kale's destruction. He devoted hours to reviewing security footage from Kale's living space. Searching for any damning revelation, he dissected Kale's communications, scrutinizing every note, every message, every secure data stream. He even had Kale's personal effects covertly analyzed, hoping to unearth a concealed weapon, an illicit substance, some insight into his true nature. But he found nothing of consequence. The absence of tangible proof only amplified his distrust. He became convinced that Kale was a master of deception, a skilled strategist who had anticipated his every maneuver. But he saw conspiracies everywhere. Coded messages in Kale's offhand remarks, veiled threats in his courteous greetings. His obsession was consuming him, pushing him toward the precipice of insanity. He was shirking his duties, alienating his allies, and jeopardizing his own career. But he couldn't relent. He wouldn't relent. He was convinced that the Empire's survival rested upon his actions. Late one night, in his darkened office, he sat alone, staring at a holopic of Kale. The human's expression was impassive, his gaze enigmatic. Forlag felt a surge of loathing, a burning desire to shatter the facade, to expose the monster beneath. "I will not allow you to destroy us," he rasped, his voice cracking. "I will not let you prevail." His hand trembled as he reached for his datapad. He had one final play, a desperate gamble that could either obliterate Kale or expose Forlag's own recklessness and delusion. He paused, his conscience locked in a battle with his conviction. Ultimately, his fear prevailed. He initiated a secure channel and sent a coded message to an informant within the Senate, a message containing a veiled accusation, a carefully crafted insinuation that Kale was plotting against the Emperor himself. The warped truth festered, a poison seeping into the public's minds, and Forlag, trapped by his inner demons, was determined to see it spread, even at the cost of everything. His descent was complete, propelled by fear, paranoia, and a desperate bid to control a narrative spiraling beyond his grasp. Fury of the populace. Crimson projections of Kale's face, marred by digital slashes, dominated the holoscreens, underscored by text torrents accusing him of unspeakable war crimes. The capital's sprawling plazas reverberated with amplified condemnations. Butcher Kale. Human sympathizer. Exile the sinner. Forlag's propaganda offensive had detonated into this frenzy of public animosity. In his quarters, Kale absorbed the chaotic feeds. The sterile chrome reflected the turmoil etched on his face. A chilling premonition crawled through him, a dark echo of the dread he'd sown across planets. Now, the harvest was his, amplified 1,000-fold. Dr. Eris Thorne's entrance was marked by a worried frown. "Kale, you must remain here. The streets are far too dangerous." "Dangerous?" Kale's voice rumbled, a low growl. "When has safety ever been my privilege?" He flung a hand toward the screens. "Look at them, Eris. They thirst for my blood. Perhaps they are justified." Eris shook his head, a vehement denial. "Forlag has poisoned their minds. Kale, they've never seen the real you." "The real me?" A mirthless bark escaped Kale. "That real me is steeped in the carnage of 70,000 souls. That he is the monster they see. That's fallacy. You've evolved. Redemption is within your reach." Eris closed the space between them, urgency underscoring his tone. "Your allegiance now binds you to the Empire." Kale averted his gaze, Unable to meet Eris's earnestness, he yearned to embrace that hope, to grasp at deliverance. But the weight of his deeds was a crushing gravity. Outside, the plaza's chorus intensified, leaching through the soundproofing, an insistent demand. The imperial capital's meticulously crafted facade of order was collapsing. The Praetorian Guard, emblematic of unyielding authority, struggled against the tide of discontent. Riot control drones, energy batons spitting blue arcs, faced barrages of thrown refuse and shouts of defiance. The contingent of protesters, their features warped by incandescent fury, peeled away from the main demonstration, heading toward the human sector. Once a sanctuary for newly integrated citizens, the district now symbolized misplaced fear and simmering hatred. Within a modest hab unit, Ilera, a young data analyst, huddled with her family. Each thrumming footstep of the approaching mob a hammer blow to their hope, glass shattered like dreams denied, adding to the rising crescendo of wrathful voices. "Mama, I'm afraid," her daughter whispered, too young to comprehend the venom directed her way. Ilera tightened her embrace, projecting a calm she did not possess. Jian, her husband, an ex-engineer, stood sentinel at the viewport, his face a study in grim resolve. "They're breaching the barricades," he breathed, his voice taut with suppressed terror. "We must find somewhere, anywhere, to vanish." Abruptly, the hab unit door groaned under the mob's relentless assault. Hinges shrieked in anguish as it splintered, revealing a sea of inflamed faces. "Humans out," a voice shrieked. "Return to your ancestral worlds." The mob surged, hands grasping, eyes burning with virulent xenophobia. Ilera screamed, shielding her child as Jian stepped forward, a bulwark against the tide. Back in his quarters, a tremor resonated through Kale via the force, a sickening resonance of impending violence rippling through the city. He knew, with absolute clarity, what was unfolding. "I must intervene," he declared, his voice steel-forged anew. Eris seized his arm. "No, Kale, they will tear you apart." "Possibly," Kale replied, wrenching free. "But standing idle is a heavier burden than any potential demise. I am the architect of this catastrophe. I must attempt to dismantle it." He activated his calm, his voice resolute. "Praetorian command, this is Kale. I demand immediate transport to the human sector. A riot is in full swing." Hesitation crackled across the line. "Praetor Kale, your well-being is paramount. We cannot authorize this maneuver. The situation is too volatile." "Authorization is irrelevant. I am proceeding," Kale retorted, his voice slicing through the static. "I will not bear responsibility for another drop of spilled blood." He strode towards the transport bay. Ignoring Eris's pleas, he secured his plasma sword. The familiar weight a stark solace, as the transport hurtled through the sky. Kale gazed down at the unfolding inferno. Fires consumed buildings, plumes of acrid smoke painting the heavens black. Once pristine thoroughfares were now littered with ruin and the broken bodies of the wounded. The people's wrath was a tidal force, a beast he knew far too intimately. The transport touched down near the boundary of the human sector. Kale descended into bedlam. The atmosphere was thick with acrid smoke, and the stench of burning buildings, screams, and the shattering of glass formed a symphony of destruction. He spotted a group of rioters besieging a shop, its windows shattered, its shelves ransacked. He charged, his plasma sword erupting to life with a crackling hum. "Stop," he bellowed, his voice amplified by the force, reaching across the maelstrom. "This ends now." The rioters whirled, surprise warring with defiance on their faces. They recognized him, the hated figure from the projections. "Kale," one bellowed. "The butcher, you will pay for your crimes." They advanced, wielding makeshift weapons, pipes, clubs, shards of glass. Kale held his ground, his plasma sword a whirlwind of pure energy. He parried their blows, disarming them with calculated precision, avoiding, if possible, mortal injury. But more rioters converged, drawn by the din. The mob swelled, encircling him, their loathing a palpable weight. Kale fought with merciless determination, his movements honed to deadly precision. He was a force of nature, a solitary bastion against the raging storm. Suddenly, a figure broke through the mass. Wielding a heavy metal BAR.IT was Jian, Alara's husband, his face marred by dirt and streaks of dried blood. You, Jian howled, his voice thick with rage and grief. You are the author of this horror. He swung the bar with all his strength. Kale, unprepared for the assault, barely managed to deflect the blow. The impact resonated through his shoulder, sending a jolt of white-hot pain. He fixed his gaze on Jian, sorrow etched on his face. He registered the anguish, the fear, the desperation etched into the man's features. He knew Jian's accusations were merited. He carried the burden of responsibility. His past had returned to stalk him. To poison the present moment, he lowered his plasma sword. I understand your fury, he said, his voice barely audible above the cacophony. It is justly directed. He closed his eyes, bracing for the inevitable blow, but it never came. Instead, a shout pierced the air. A warning cry. He opened his eyes to find Alara interposed between him and Jian, her arms spread wide. Stop, she cried. Do not give in to violence. Vengeance provides no resolution. Jian faltered. Warring emotions twisting his face, he gazed at his wife, at the plea within her gaze, and slowly lowered the metal bar. The crowd hushed, their rage temporarily quelled, their attention drawn to Alara's bravery, her unexpected mercy. Kale returned Alara's gaze, his spirit a blend of gratitude and profound shame. He had anticipated vilification, condemnation. Instead, he found a spark of hope, a fragile ember of compassion amidst the surrounding devastation. Yet, the brief respite was shattered as a figure materialized at the edge of the throng. His features contorted by malice, it was Forlag, his eyes blazing with triumph. Behold, Forlag roared, his voice amplified by a personal broadcaster. The butcher surrendering to the mob. This confirms his treachery. Seize him, arrest him now. The crowd surged anew, their fury rekindled. The Praetorian Guard, emboldened by Forlag's decree, surged forward, weapons drawn. Kale understood his fate. He had fallen short. He had sought expiation, but his past had irrevocably ensnared him. He was trapped between the inflamed masses and Forlag's machinations. Escape was impossible. That hope's flicker had been extinguished, leaving only the cold inevitability of his damnation. Warning signs. The sterile air of the med bay, sharp with disinfectant and the coppery scent of blood, tightened Zara's chest. She circled before the window, her anxious visage superimposed on the tableau within. Kale, bare from the waist up, was perched on a bio bed, his sculpted back a roadmap of old battles and recent lacerations that a medical droid, a tireless automaton, hummed as it spread a soothing unguent over his wounds. Injuries sustained defending humans, the very people now likely clamoring for his demise. Disquiet roiled within her. Hours had dissolved as she scrutinized Kale's psychological profile, comparing it against the frantic data streams flooding in from the city. Forlag's propaganda had ignited riots that now raged unchecked. Entire human districts were besieged, residents terrorized for the sin of their existence. The irony stung like acid. Kale, branded a monster, had hurled himself into the chaos, risking everything to protect those whipped into a hateful frenzy against him. She massaged her throbbing temples, the burden of her position a crushing weight. Had she misjudged him? Had her zeal to validate her integration theories obscured the darkness coiled within? The casualty figures, that ghastly ledger, haunted her mind. Could anyone truly shed a history so stained? A chime from the droid signaled completion. Kale rose, his movements graceful despite his battered state, and donned his tunic. Spotting Zara beyond the window, he offered a clipped acknowledgement. She activated the door and stepped inside. Kale a moment. He pivoted, his expression a locked vault. Dr. Aristide, I doubt this is a friendly visit. Zara exhaled heavily. I wish it were that simple. We need to discuss the situation. He inclined his head toward a pair of chairs near the bio bed. Please, Doctor, I suspect this will be protracted. She remained fixed. She needed directness, to bypass the carefully constructed formalities that always seemed to cocoon him. You're treading a dangerous path, Kale. He quirked an eyebrow, a glint of curiosity in his gaze. Careful. That feels somewhat belated. Forlag is weaponizing you. That he's twisting your history, amplifying your deeds, manipulating public fear to cement his control. She paused, studying his reaction. He wants you neutralized, discredited, imprisoned, or worse. Kale folded his arms, his attention fixed on an invisible point behind her. I am not ignorant of General Forlag's unfavorable opinion. It's more than dislike. Kale. It's a calculated assault. He's drip-feeding the media selectively edited intel, manufacturing evidence, stoking the fires of xenophobia. The KRYLL threat is genuine, but he's perverting it to justify his prejudice against humans, against you. The KRYLL serve as a convenient bogeyman, Kale conceded, his tone devoid of inflection. And I, it seems, am a readily available monster. That's the narrative he's crafting. He wants to provoke a reaction, to goad you into violence, to validate his allegations. Zara moved closer, her voice softening. Don't afford him that satisfaction, Kale, please. He finally met her gaze, his features relaxing infinitesimally. And what alternative would you propose, Doctor? To stand impassively by while humans are assaulted, while they pay the price for transgressions I committed long before their birth? Zara raked a hand through her hair, frustration tightening her jaw. No, of course not. But you must be discerning. Every action is under a microscope, every utterance subject to distortion. You need foresight to evaluate the consequences. Consequences? A mirthless laugh escaped him. What further consequences could overshadow those I have already endured? Never underestimate Forlag. Kale. He's engaged in a perilous game, and you are the playing piece. He's isolating you, inciting the masses, even turning the Praetorian Guard against you. The Praetorian Guard are sworn to the Empire, Dr. ASMI. Zara suppressed a scream. His unyielding allegiance, his rigid adherence to duty, was simultaneously admirable and exasperating. That it also constituted his most profound vulnerability. Loyalty should not be indiscriminate. Kale, you need to recognize what is unfolding. Forlag is eroding the very foundations of the Empire, all in the name of security. She summoned a datapad and presented him with a cascade of news bulletins, social media tirades, and official imperial pronouncements. Each one painted an increasingly damning portrait of Kale, emphasizing his dissident history, highlighting the appalling body count, and subtly suggesting his menace to imperial stability. Kale perused the documents, his face darkening with each passing line. Fabrications, exaggerations, yet a kernel of truth lingers within. He's exploiting fear, Kale, fear of the unknown, of the other. The KRYLL are the catalyst, but you're the conduit for that fear. And the riots? He questioned, his eyes sharpening. Are those also conjured from falsehoods? No, Zara admitted. The riots are genuine, but they're fueled by disinformation and bias. Forlag is deliberately fanning the flames, using your history as fuel. So, I am to stand idle and permit the conflagration to consume everything? No, you need to place your trust in me, Kale. Zara closed the distance between them, her plea sincere. I'm attempting to assist you, but I am powerless if you continue to act on impulse. Impulse? He arched a brow. Safeguarding innocent lives is scarcely an impulsive act, Doctor. I acknowledge that, but you require a more subtle approach. You need to permit the authorities to manage the situation. Provocation will only validate Forlag's designs. The authorities? Kale scoffed. The very authorities who permit these riots to proliferate, the same authorities who propagate falsehoods about me? Zara sighed. I am aware that trust is a scarce commodity at present, but there exist individuals within the Empire who believe in you, who perceive your potential for good. You must afford them the opportunity to intervene. He regarded her, his eyes probing. And you, Doctor, do you retain faith in me? The question hung suspended, laden with implicit doubts and uncertainties. Zara hesitated, her own conviction wavering. She had invested immeasurably in Kale, in his rehabilitation, in the prospect of redemption. Yet the undeniable magnitude of his past, coupled with the current crisis, seeded doubt. I desire to believe in you, Kale, she responded at last, her voice barely audible. But you are testing my resolve. He nodded slowly, his expression one of bleak acceptance. I comprehend. Then I implore you, Zara pleaded. Heed my advice. Refrain from rash actions. Remain discreet. Allow me to reason with Forlag, to expose his deceptions, grant me the chance to rectify this. Kale remained silent for an extended moment, his gaze fixed on the floor. Then, he looked up, his eyes reflecting a fusion of weariness and defiance. I appreciate your concern, Doctor, he said, but I cannot stand passively by while innocent individuals are harmed. But you will only exacerbate the situation, Zara protested, her voice edging towards desperation. You will be playing directly into Forlag's strategy. Perhaps, Kale conceded, but I cannot reconcile an action with my conscience. He turned and strode towards the doorway, his posture rigid, his movements resolute. Kale, wait, Zara called out. But he did not falter. He paused at the threshold, his hand resting on the door control. Thank you, Doctor, for your concern, but I must adhere to what I deem is right. With those words, he exited the medical bay and vanished into the sprawling corridors of Praetorian headquarters, leaving Zara alone with her anxieties. She collapsed into one of the chairs, burying her face in her hands. She had striven to caution him, to reason with him, to safeguard him. But Kale was an elemental force, guided by an internal compass seemingly impervious to reason. She closed her eyes, a shiver tracing its path down her spine. That a sense of foreboding washed over her. The warning signs blazed bright, like flares against the encroaching darkness. But Kale, blinded by his unwavering sense of duty and a relentless pursuit of justice, seemed determined to ignore them. And Zara, despite all her efforts, was powerless to deter him. The weight of her impotence settled upon her, suffocating her with a feeling of impending doom. She knew, with a chilling certainty, that Forlag was gaining ground, and Kale, despite his might and valor, was walking directly into his snare, the edge of betrayal. The stale atmosphere of the Praetorian barracks clung to him, a cloying miasma of reprocessed water and simmering discontent. Kale perched on his bunk's edge, the meager mattress offering scant respite. His muscles throbbed, a consequence of Forlag's recent combat drills, but a deeper ache gnawed within. The sharp sting of disloyalty Zara's hesitant words echoed, a discordant melody against the oaths he'd sworn to the Imperium. Was he merely a tool? A piece shuffled across Forlag's elaborate board. He traced the jagged scar that marred his brow, a memento from a life he'd fought to suppress. 70,000 souls. The number resonated like a gravitic anchor, pulling him into the abyss of his history. He'd envisioned the Imperium as a path to atonement, an outlet for his capabilities in service of a noble cause. Yet, the whispers had reignited, the furtive glances, the thinly veiled accusations. They perceived a monster, not a man struggling towards salvation. Rising, he crossed to the small, stained viewport. The sprawling cityscape stretched before him, an infinite mosaic of light and shadow. The KRYLL menace was genuine. He'd witnessed their barbarity, the chilling, calculated precision with which they snuffed out existence. But Forlag's tactics, they reeked of something far more insidious than mere prejudice. They whispered of rampant ambition. Kale's fist clenched. He hadn't intervened in the civil unrest to curry favor with Forlag. He'd acted because innocents were being butchered. He'd seen the terror in their gaze, the desperate pleas for intervention. He couldn't stand idly by, not again. Yet, his intervention had only stoked the fires of suspicion, reinforcing Forlag's assertion that he was a volatile element, a weapon capable of turning against the very state that wielded it. The idea of desertion had been a persistent whisper, a nagging discomfort beneath his skin. He could vanish into the galactic frontier, relinquish the crimson armor and the weighty expectations, revert to the life of a solitary warrior, beholden to none. It would be simpler, safer. He wouldn't have to perpetually justify his being, to validate his allegiance to a populace that would never fully embrace him. But then, he conjured Zara's image, her unwavering faith in him, the palpable concern in her demeanor. And he remembered the faces of the displaced he'd aided during the upheaval, the gratefulness in their expressions, the tenuous flicker of optimism he'd reignited. Could he abandon them? Could he forsake the opportunity, however improbable, to genuinely improve their lot? The portal to his cubicle whispered open, and Rorik marched in. His expression grave. He deposited a data slate on Kale's bunk. You're trending, pal. Forlags spun you a beauty. They're dusting off, the the Butcher of Lorien again. Kale retrieved the slate and scanned the articles. His gut twisted. The headlines blared indictments. Embellished tales of past atrocities interwoven with skewed accounts of the recent riots. Hollow images of the KRLL flashed, juxtaposed with shots of Kale, his face a mask of fury. The narrative was clear. Kale was a fiend, a threat to the Imperium, as dangerous as the KRYLL themselves. Propaganda. Kale stated, his tone devoid of emotion, distortions, and outright lies. Rorik sighed, raking a hand through his receding hairline. Doesn't matter, does it? Perception trumps reality, particularly when Forlag is pulling the strings. The people are afraid. Kale, they need a scapegoat, and Forlag has handed them a prime specimen. So what am I meant to do? Kale asked, a hint of exasperation in his voice. Stand back and witness him dismantle the Imperium from within. Maybe you should, Rorik replied softly. Maybe this isn't your battle. Kale stared at him, taken aback. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting you've been striving to fit a role you were never destined for, that you're a predator. Kale, done a goddamn apex predator. The Imperium seeks to domesticate you, turn you into a pet. But that's not who you are. I'm trying to evolve, Kale said, his voice barely audible. I'm trying to be better. Rorik snorted derisively. Better? What even is that? You think burying your history will erase it. It's intrinsic to you, Kale, that it's what defines you. You think these sterile floors and extravagant uniforms can cleanse the blood from your hands. They can't. He moved closer, his gaze locking with Kale's. Embrace it, Kale. Embrace the darkness within. Harness it. Don't let Forlag use you. Use him. Turn his fear into your weapon. Kale recoiled. That's precisely what I've been trying to prevent. And how's that strategy been working for you? Rorik retorted, gesturing around the confined space. You're being vilified for attempting to be a paragon. The Imperium craves a weapon. Kale, provide them with one, but ensure it's aimed at the correct target. Silence filled the room, broken only by the whir of the ventilation system. Kale studied Rorik, his mind racing. He'd always admired Rorik's cynicism, his capacity to perceive the world as it was, not as it ought to be. Now, however, it resembled a warped form of wisdom. Where would I even begin? Kale finally asked, the question hanging in the air. Rorik shrugged. It's irrelevant. The Outer Rim is vast. Plenty need a skilled warrior, people who won't judge you for what you have done. Or you could remain. Confront Forlag on his terms. Prove that you're not the monster he sees, or perhaps you are. And perhaps that's exactly what should terrify him. He clapped Kale on the shoulder, his grip surprisingly firm. Whatever choice you make, remember who you are. Kale, don't let them define you. Define yourself. Rorik turned and headed towards the portal. As he reached the threshold, he paused, glancing back at Kale. Just one more thing, he added, his voice subdued. Keep a sharp eye on Zara. Forlag has her targeted. He views her as your vulnerability. The portal hissed shut, leaving Kale alone in the silence. Rorik's words lingered, a powerful cocktail of cynicism and encouragement. Embrace the darkness. Use him. Protect Zara. The choices were stark, the trajectory uncertain. That he could flee, dissolve into the shadows, and abandon the Imperium to its destiny. Or he could stay, retaliate, and risk becoming the very monster they accused him of being. He examined his hands, the hands that had claimed so many lives. Could he genuinely reform? Could he outrun the phantom of his past? Or was he doomed to be defined by his kill count, a weapon manipulated by others, a pawn in a game he couldn't even fully fathom? The seed of betrayal had taken root. It was flourishing now, nourished by doubt and suspicion. The Imperium had promised redemption, but it had delivered only condemnation. He was poised on the precipice, wavering between two realities, unsure where he would fall. One thing was certain. The moment of decision was rapidly approaching. The scent of recycled water and simmering resentment gave way to something new. The acrid tang of simmering fury. The fury that would inform his next action. A stand for hope. The weight of the Imperium pressed down on Valerius as he mounted the holopodium. The sweeping expanse of Corvus City's plaza opened before him, a shimmering mosaic of faces upturned beneath the artificial sun's glare. He felt the collective tension, the undercurrent of resentment Forlag had so expertly fanned. The very air vibrated with suppressed anxiety. He adjusted the microphone, the resulting sibilance magnifying across the square. "Citizens of the Imperium," he began, his voice amplified to a resonant, authoritative timbre. "I stand before you today at a juncture, at a moment demanding unflinching honesty about ourselves, our creeds, and the very bedrock of justice." He paused, letting the words settle, his gaze traversing the expectant throng. He discerned curiosity mingled with dread, anger laced with an unyielding skepticism. He shifted, his voice adopting a more intimate quality. "The recent disclosures regarding Kale, our Praetorian, have understandably sparked disquiet. The accounts of his past deeds, the horrors perpetrated on Lorien, are undeniably appalling. That I will not attempt to minimize them, that I will not insult your intelligence by suggesting they are anything less than monstrous." A murmur rippled through the crowd, a tangible shift in the atmosphere. He could feel the press of their collective judgment. Valerius forged ahead, acutely aware of the tightrope he walked. "But I implore you to consider, does a single, albeit ghastly, fragment define a life? Are we, a civilization that vaunts its enlightenment and progress, so quick to condemn, so unwilling to countenance the potential for reformation?" He glimpsed Counselor Alara near the front, her features creased with concern, yet her eyes held a spark of encouragement. He drew resolve from her presence. "Kale sought not accolades, but amends when he came to us," Valerius proclaimed, his voice ringing with sincerity. "He presented himself to the Imperium, not as a victor, but as a petitioner. He offered his skills, forged in the crucible of war, to defend us, to serve us. And for a time, he did so with unswerving dedication." He recounted Kale's contributions, carefully selecting instances of his selflessness, the times he jeopardized his own well-being to safeguard others, his unwavering commitment to duty. He told of Kale's reliability and the respect garnered from those who fought at his side. He crafted a portrait of a man battling to outrun his history, genuinely striving to compensate for past transgressions. "I have spent considerable time with Kale," Valerius continued, his voice softening to a near-conversational tone. "I have seen the remorse etched on his face, the haunted look born of sleepless nights, and the burden of unimaginable acts. That I have witnessed him wrestling to reconcile the fiend he once was with the man he now tries to become." He paused, letting his words reverberate. "Some will argue that such metamorphosis is impossible, that a soul indelibly stained with so much carnage can never be purified, that the butcher of Lorien is forever doomed to remain a butcher. But I refuse to accept that premise. That I refuse to believe that we, as a society, should forsake hope, abandon the possibility of redemption. For if we do, what reflection does that cast upon us? What testament does it offer regarding our capacity for forgiveness, for understanding, for empathy?" He saw visages hardening within the throng, faces unmoved by his plea that Forlag's propaganda had taken root, poisoning minds with apprehension and mistrust. Yet, he also saw countenances that were open, thoughtful, ready to entertain his arguments. He centered on those, drawing vitality from their willingness to listen. "We need Kale," Valerius declared starkly, his voice regaining its commanding edge. "We are confronted by threats unlike any encountered before. The KRYL are not mindless automatons. They are astute, merciless, and adaptable. We require every edge possible to safeguard ourselves against them." Kale's abilities, his insights, his profound understanding of warfare, are priceless. He tackled the practicalities. To dismiss him, to incarcerate him, would not only constitute an injustice, but an act of self-inflicted harm. That we would be discarding a weapon, a bulwark. At the very instant we require it most, we would be weakening our defenses, rendering ourselves more susceptible to the very dangers he is uniquely positioned to address. He saw a man within the multitude shout, but the words were devoured by the rising tide of voices. The debate erupted, a maelstrom of opinions and sentiments. Some championed his cause, echoing his pronouncements, while others vociferously condemned him, accusing him of naivete, of treason. Valerius raised his hands, striving to restore order. "I comprehend your anxieties," he called out, his voice magnified across the plaza. "I appreciate your misgivings, but I beseech you, do not allow apprehension. To cloud your judgment, do not allow yourselves to be manipulated by those who seek to exploit your emotions for their own ends. He knew his target was Forlag, and he noticed a flicker of ire in the general's eyes. Even from that removed, he circled back to his central argument. We must aspire to greater heights, that we must be more enlightened, more compassionate, more willing to embrace the potential for change. Kale has erred, grievously, but he is not defined by those errors. That he is defined by his actions, by his choices, by his dedication to atonement, and I believe, with every fiber of my being, that he warrants an opportunity to prove himself. He gestured toward the towering imperial palace looming behind him. The Imperium champions justice, equality, the security of all its citizens. We cannot abandon these tenets now, merely because we are afraid that we must uphold our ideals, even when it is challenging, even when it provokes discomfort. He observed Counselor Alara approaching the holopodium, her expression serene. She laid a hand on his arm, a gesture of solidarity. He understood that her mere presence would lend weight to his message. Citizens, Alara said, her voice measured and reassuring. Valerius speaks with wisdom. That he reminds us of the core values that bind us as an Imperium: justice, compassion, and faith in the capacity for redemption. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the audience, her eyes connecting with individuals, offering understanding and empathy. We must not allow dread to dictate our course. That we must not yield to the divisive rhetoric that seeks to splinter us. That we must stand as one, united in our devotion to justice and equality. She turned to Valerius, a warm smile gracing her lips. The decision before us is not easily met, she acknowledged. But I believe that by pursuing open and honest discourse, by listening to one another with empathy, we can achieve a resolution that is just, fair, and for the betterment of the Imperium. Valerius nodded, appreciative of her assistance. He knew her remarks would hold considerable sway, particularly among those who remained on the fence. He turned back to the congregation, his heart churning with a mixture of hope and dread. He had given everything he had spoken from his very soul, appealing to their logic, their humanity, their sense of right and wrong. Now, the decision rested with them. The destiny of Kale, and perhaps the destiny of the Imperium itself, hung precariously. The crowd continued to roil with dissent. The debate showed no signs of slowing. But in that chaos, Valerius sensed something else, an ember of aspiration. He witnessed faces subtly soften, faces opening to alternate viewpoints. He saw people ready to believe in the promise of restoration. And at that moment, he was certain that he had made the right decision. He had championed hope. Even amidst overwhelming opposition, the struggle was far from completion, but a seed had been sown, one that he hoped would take root and blossom into a more enlightened and compassionate Imperium. The general's gambit. The eruption wasn't contained within the Senate. A groundswell of fervent support surged from the streets, visibly emboldening Forlag. Valerius registered the subtle atmospheric change, a palpable tightening as the crowd's enthusiasm morphed into something more ominous. Unwavering, he caught Alara's gaze, her usually placid expression clouded with unease. The odds, it appeared, had turned against them. Forlag, reveling in the adoration, raised a gauntlet hand, silencing the multitude. Instantly, their eyes, a sea of unwavering focus, locked onto him. His voice, amplified by covert emitters, boomed with chilling dominance. The Imperium has heeded your pleas. It has witnessed the corruption festering within. The butcher of Lorien festers among us, a serpent at our breast, poisoning our strength. He paused, letting the accusation settle like a shroud. I have dedicated my existence to the Empire, battled across 1,000 star systems to safeguard our people, and I will not stand idle while our bedrock principles are eroded by conciliation. Then came the command, crisp and absolute. Praetorian Guard, secure the Senate chambers, N01 exits without my express decree. A cold thread snaked down Valerius's spine. This wasn't mere political posturing. This was a far graver gambit. He observed the guards' almost imperceptible movements, the instinctive clenching of fists on their weapons, the tacit nod Forlag imparted to their commander. They were his puppets now. Before Valerius could intervene, the Senate chamber's massive shields crashed shut, imprisoning them. A collective intake of breath swept through the assembly. Whispers spiraled into frantic murmurs. Ilera gripped Valerius's arm. What's he planning? Declaring war, Valerius responded grimly, his gaze fixed on Forlag. He's playing his hand. Outside, the situation deteriorated rapidly. Forlag's cohorts, strategically pre-deployed, initiated a takeover of critical Imperial infrastructure. The central communications nexus was the first to fall, stifling dissenting voices and granting Forlag control over the information stream. Next came the planetary defense network, leaving the capital vulnerable. The Imperial Palace was encircled, its loyalist defenders caught completely by surprise. Sirens blared, their mournful song echoing through the urban canyons. Panic bloomed in the streets, the initial euphoria of Forlag's adherents quickly curdling into dread as the gravity of the situation sank in. Sporadic gunfire crackled, the sharp bursts of energy weapons slicing through the air. Inside the Senate chamber, Forlag addressed the trapped senators with calculated calm. Order will be restored. The Imperium will be cleansed. But first, we must excise the gangrene. I demand the immediate surrender of Kale. A stunned silence followed his proclamation. Some senators exchanged furtive glances, others averted their eyes. A handful, fueled by personal ambition or won over by Forlag's rhetoric, offered subtle nods of assent. He is a menace to our security, a peril to our way of life. His past transgressions are unforgivable. His capacity for devastation is too great, Forlag continued, his voice laced with sanctimonious indignation. Hand him over, and I guarantee a swift return to stability. Refuse, and the consequences will be dire. Valerius stepped forward, his voice cutting through the suffocating atmosphere. You can't do this, Forlag. This is treason. You are rending the Imperium asunder. Forlag swiveled his gaze toward Valerius, his eyes like chips of ice. Treason? No. Valerius, I am safeguarding the Imperium. I am purging it of decay, of feebleness. You, on the other hand, are blinded by sentiment. You perceive potential where only hazard dwells. And you see only dread and resentment. Ilera countered, her voice ringing with conviction. The Imperium is founded on justice, on empathy, not on paranoia and brute force. Forlag scoffed. Justice and empathy are indulgences we can no longer indulge. The KRYLL lurk at our gates, and we require strength, not fragility. We require a leader prepared to make the harsh calls, to sacrifice the few for the salvation of the many. Sacrifice the guiltless, you mean? Valerius retorted, his voice rising. Kale has proven his allegiance. He has fought for the Empire. He deserves a chance to double-cross us all. Forlag sneered. No, he is too treacherous to be allowed to exist. He addressed the assembly once more. I will not repeat myself. Surrender, Kale, or suffer the consequences. The silence descended again, heavier than before. Valerius knew time was seeping away. He surveyed the chamber, searching for allies, for anyone who would stand with him against Forlag's mania. But the fear reflected in their eyes spoke volumes. They were ensnared, frozen by trepidation and indecision. Outside, the fighting intensified. Loyalist forces, fragmented and disorganized, attempted to launch a counterattack. But Forlag's forces, well prepared and strategically placed, swiftly gained the advantage. The sounds of detonations and gunfire grew louder, nearer, a constant reminder of the pandemonium consuming the city. Meanwhile, within the confines of his heavily guarded cell, Kale detected the shift in the force. The pall of darkness was spreading, a suffocating tidal wave of fear and wrath that threatened to engulf everything. That he closed his eyes, sharpening his senses, attempting to pinpoint the source of the disturbance. He sensed Forlag's presence, a frigid, calculating malice that resonated deep within his very being. He understood what was unfolding. Forlag was executing his move. Kale opened his eyes, his gaze hardening. He had aspired to outrun his past, to find atonement within the ranks of the Praetorian Guard. But it appeared that destiny, or perhaps Forlag, had other designs. That he stood, muscles coiling, thoughts racing. That he had to unearth a path to escape, to thwart Forlag before he annihilated everything. Back in the Senate chamber, the tension was almost tangible. Valerius could discern the fear etched upon the senators' faces, The desperation glinting in their eyes, he knew they were on the brink of collapse, of handing Kale over to Forlag's bloodlust. He inhaled deeply, preparing for his last stand. He would not permit Forlag to prevail. He would not allow Kale to be offered up that he would resist, even if it meant his own demise. But before he could vocalize his defiance, a voice echoed through the chamber. A voice simultaneously familiar and unexpected. "I am here." Every head swiveled toward the voice's origin. Standing in the doorway, flanked by 2 Praetorian guards, stood Kale. His eyes, burning with an intensity that sent icy tendrils down their spines, were fixed on Forlag. The collective gasp spread through the assembly. They had believed him imprisoned, helpless. Yet here he stood, defiant and unbroken. Forlag's face darkened with rage. How? How did you escape?" Kale ignored him, his gaze still pinned on Forlag. "You want me? Here I am. But be warned, General, you will not find me a pushover." He turned to the assembly, his voice resonating with newfound authority. "This is not about me. This is about the Imperium. Forlag is a traitor. He is tearing us apart from within. That we must stop him before all is lost." Then, without warning, he surged forward, his movements a blur of swiftness and precision. The Praetorian guards flanking him barely had time to react before he disarmed them, their weapons crashing onto the floor. Bedlam erupted in the Senate chamber. Senators shrieked and scrambled for safety. Praetorian guards surged forward, weapons drawn. But Kale was too agile, too adept that he moved through them like a tempest, disarming and incapacitating them with ruthless efficiency. Forlag watched in disbelief. As his meticulously crafted scheme began to unravel, he had underestimated Kale, his resilience, his expertise. He had believed him broken, vanquished. But he was mistaken. Kale reached Forlag, his eyes alight with fury. He seized the general by the throat, hoisting him off the ground. "This ends now, Forlag," Kale growled, his voice dripping menace. "Your reign of terror concludes." He tightened his grip, his fingers digging into Forlag's windpipe. The general gasped for air, his face purpling. Valerius watched, horrified, his mind reeling. He had hoped to avert this, to discover a peaceful solution. But it was apparent now that there was no turning back. The fate of the Imperium teetered, balanced on the precipice of Kale's choices. Suddenly, a surge of reinforcements stormed into the Senate chamber, laser fire igniting throughout the room. Caught between Kale and the new arrivals, Forlag regained a flicker of composure and shouted above the din. "Kill him! Kill him now!" Kale, left with no alternative, released Forlag, who crumpled to the ground. Struggling for breath, he wheeled to confront the next wave of attackers. Kale knew this was far from finished. He was still the butcher of Lorien in their eyes. And now, he was an enemy of the Imperium. The battle for the Imperium had only just begun. Shattered allegiances. The stun blasts had given way to lethal rounds within minutes. What started as a theatrical power grab in the Senate chamber had bled out into the corridors, then the streets, and finally, the entire Imperium. The iron fist Forlag promised had clenched, not around external threats, but around the throat of the very society he swore to protect. Valerius watched the holoscreens flicker with fractured reports. Loyalist garrisons in the outer rim were holding, but Forlag's propaganda machine was already painting them as rogue elements, puppets of Kale. Here, on Corvus Prime, the capital, pockets of resistance were forming, but they were outgunned and isolated. The azure banners of the Imperium were being torn down, replaced with crude, crimson standards bearing Forlag's snarling wolf sigil. "The 7th Fleet has declared for Forlag, Your Excellency," a young aide stammered, handing Valerius a datapad. "Admiral Thrax, he's broadcasting a message of support, citing the KRYLL threat and the need for a pure Imperium." Valerius slammed his fist on the war table, the metal groaning under the force. "Thrax," he swore an oath. "The man is a coward, hiding behind xenophobia." He knew it wasn't just cowardice. Forlag had promised power, positions, influence. The rot had been spreading for months, festering beneath the surface of the Imperium's gilded facade. "What of the Praetorian Guard?" Valerius asked, the question heavy with dread. The aide hesitated. "Reports are conflicting, Your Excellency. Some units are maintaining order, upholding their oaths to the Emperor. Others have sided with Forlag. The division seems to be along ideological lines. Valerius closed his eyes, picturing the faces of the men and women he'd sworn to lead. The elite of the elite, now poised to tear each other apart. He thought of Kale, locked away in the black site, a pawn in Forlag's twisted game, that a pawn who, ironically, might be the only one capable of ending this madness on the training grounds. Jax felt the ground tremble beneath his boots. It wasn't from some training exercise. That it was the distant thud of artillery, the ominous rumble of a collapsing power. Structured, he stood with a dozen other aspirants to the Praetorian Guard, their faces etched with confusion and fear. Senior officers, their armor gleaming in the harsh sunlight, were shouting orders, trying to maintain a semblance of discipline amidst the chaos. "Praetorians, listen up," barked Commander Lyra, her voice strained but firm. "The Imperium is under attack from within. Forlag is a traitor, a power-hungry demagogue who seeks to dismantle everything we stand for. We will defend the Emperor, the Senate, and the people of the Imperium." A murmur rippled through the ranks. Jax saw doubt clouding the eyes of some, a flicker of fanaticism in others. The news feeds were filled with Forlag's rhetoric, playing on their fears, stoking their prejudices. The KRYLL, the enigmatic alien threat on the fringes of explored space, were being used as a justification for everything. Forlag promised security, a strong hand to guide them through the coming storm. "What about Kale?" A voice called out from the back. That it was Marcus, a hulking brute with a shaved head and a history of disciplinary infractions. "Is he with us, or against us?" Lyra hesitated, her face hardening. "Kale is under investigation. His past actions are being reviewed. For now, he is not part of this equation." Jax felt a surge of anger. Kale had saved his life during the KRYLL incursion. He had seen the man's skill, his dedication, even a glimpse of something resembling honor. But the whispers were hard to ignore. 70,000 kills, rebel leader, savior, or butcher? The question gnawed at him. "I won't fight for a system that protects a monster," Marcus spat, his hand drifting towards his sidearm. Lyra's eyes flashed. "That's enough. Disobedience will be met with swift and severe punishment." But the seed of doubt had been planted. Jax saw others shifting uneasily, their loyalty fracturing under the weight of uncertainty. He looked around at his fellow aspirants, men and women he had trained with, bled with, dreamed with. He saw fear, but he also saw something else, the potential for something terrible. The division came swiftly. A small contingent, led by Marcus, broke ranks and marched towards the Senate building, presumably to join Forlag's forces. Lyra ordered the remaining aspirants to stand their ground, to defend the training grounds at all costs. Jax stood frozen, caught between his loyalty to the Imperium, his lingering respect for Kale, and the rising tide of fear that threatened to engulf them all. He looked at the faces of his comrades, their expressions mirroring his own confusion and despair. He knew, with a sickening certainty, that this was just the beginning. On the streets of Corvus Prime, the fighting intensified. Loyalist troops, clad in the familiar blue and gold of the Imperial Guard, clashed with Forlag's crimson-clad insurgents. Blaster fire echoed through the canyons of steel and glass, painting the once pristine cityscape with scorch marks and blood. Civilians huddled in shelters, listening to the sounds of their world collapsing around them. Ilera, working furiously in a makeshift communications hub set up in the lower levels of the Senate building, tried to piece together a coherent picture of the unfolding chaos. The information was fragmented, unreliable, distorted by propaganda and fear. She saw reports of entire city blocks being leveled, of massacres in the outer provinces, of spaceports falling to Forlag's forces. "We're losing ground everywhere," she said, her voice hoarse. "Forlag has control of the media. That he's poisoning the minds of the people." A grizzled veteran, his armor stained with grime and blaster burns, shook his head. "It's not just the propaganda, Ilera. People are scared. They want someone to blame, someone to protect them. Forlag is giving them that." Ilera knew he was right. The KRYLL had shaken the Imperium's confidence, exposed its vulnerabilities. Forlag was preying on that fear, promising a return to order, a purging of the weak and the impure. "We have to reach the Emperor," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He's the only one who can stop this. But the Emperor was silent, cloistered in his palace, shielded from the realities of the war. Some said he was ill, others said he was simply unwilling to intervene. Whatever the reason, his silence was deafening. A vacuum that Forlag was eager to fill. The day's darkness fell. A sense of despair settled over Corvus Prime. The once proud capital of the Imperium was now a war zone, a symbol of its fractured identity. The azure banners lay trampled in the streets, replaced by the crimson wolf of a man who promised salvation through fear. Jax, standing guard at the training grounds, watched the fires burning in the distance. The screams of the wounded echoed in the night. He gripped his blaster, his knuckles white. He didn't know who to trust, who to fight for. All he knew was that the Imperium he had believed in, the one he had sworn to protect, was crumbling around him. The only question that remained was what would rise from the ashes. And what part would he play in its creation or its final destruction? Valerius stared out at the burning city, his face etched with grief and anger. The Imperium, his Imperium, was tearing itself apart, and somewhere, deep within the bowels of a black site, a warrior with 70,000 kills was waiting for the moment when he would be unleashed upon the world. And Valerius had a terrifying premonition that Kale's choice, whatever it may be, would decide the fate of them all. He raised his gaze to the star-filled sky. Somewhere out there, in the vast expanse of the galaxy, the KRYL watched, waited. The war within was a distraction, a weakness they could exploit, and Valerius feared that Forlag, in his blind pursuit of power, had not only shattered the Imperium's allegiances, but had also opened the door to something far more sinister. The line in the sand. The tremor shivered through the black site, ghosting along Kale's nerves. Too many detonations marked his past for him to mistake it for mere mining. He pressed an ear to the cell's frigid plasteel, a guttural warning rumbling in his chest. Days had passed since contact with Valerius or Alara de Forlag's coup had engulfed the Imperium, leaving Kale to fester in the shadows. Then, the scream, a thread of sound, frayed by distance and the site's dampening field, yet undeniably human. It ended abruptly. Choked off, his mind conjured a gallery of horrors, interrogations, summary executions, Forlag's warped justice. No, he wouldn't succumb to despair. He had to know what was happening. He hurled his shoulder against the cell door. The plasteel resonated like a death knell. Again. Futile. This prison was designed for beings far exceeding his power. Guards, he bellowed, his voice shredding with desperation. Acknowledge. What's the situation? Silence answered. He sifted through dreadful possibilities. The KRYL were not known for stealth, but their style didn't match those screams. He redoubled his assault on the door, fueled by a primal fear, long dormant. Not the dread of dying. He'd outstared death too often, but the agony of impotence, of being caged while innocents suffered. He was a weapon, tempered in blood, now locked away as the galaxy burned. Without warning, the lights stuttered, plunging the corridor into a chiaroscuro of flickering illumination. Emergency strobes clawed at the shadows, twisting them into grotesque shapes. That a klaxon wailed, a jarring symphony of impending doom. This wasn't a KRYL assault. Something deeper, internal, was tearing the place apart. The crackle of energy weapons whispered through the air, followed by the wet thud of bodies collapsing. Closer now. Understanding bloomed with chilling clarity. Forlag. The purge had begun, focusing every ounce of fury, every desperate impulse, every hard-won skill. He unleashed a blow that resonated through the very structure of the black site. He didn't just strike the door. He channeled the destructive legacy that had forged his name, the force he had fought so hard to contain. The plasteel warped, protested, and finally, with a shriek of tormented metal, surrendered. He stumbled out, assaulted by strobing light and the bitter tang of burnt circuitry and blood. Two guards lay in awkward heaps against the wall, their armor melted, their eyes empty. Forlag's elite, efficient killers. He relieved one of the corpses of its pulse rifle, checking the power cell. Half-charged, sufficient. He navigated the black site like a specter in the fractured light, drawn by the echoes of violence. Escape was paramount. He needed to find Valerius and Alara to decipher Forlag's scheme. Yet, an insistent disquiet nagged at him. Zura, her mountain research facility, remote from the capital, was precisely the sort of exposed target Forlag would exploit. Her safety was a gnawing fear that he sprinted toward the black site's comm hub, sidestepping the butchered remains of more guards. He forced access to the emergency broadcast system, his fingers dancing across the console. He locked onto Zara's secure frequency. Silenced, he tried again. Still nothing. Panic tightened its grip. He pictured Zara, her gentle eyes, her warm smile, her unwavering belief in the galaxy's inherent goodness. She embodied everything he sought to become. All he feared he couldn't beat. He couldn't let Forlag lay hands on her. Abandoning the comm hub, his decision hardened. He had to reach her. He commandeered a transport shuttle from the black site hangar. Inputting the coordinates for Zara's facility, the engines roared to life. A defiant scream against the backdrop of the Imperium's collapse. As the shuttle ascended, he caught sight of them. Forlag's cruisers, carving through the atmosphere like predators scenting blood, weapons hot. They were converging on the mountain range where Zara's facility stood. He pushed the shuttle beyond its limits. The engines groaning under the strain. He had to get there first. The research facility had been a sanctuary of calm nestled in the harsh landscape. Now, it was a charnel house that Forlag's ground troops had landed. Armored vehicles had breached the perimeter. Energy bolts stitched across the grounds. The air, thick with acrid smoke and the cries of the wounded, he landed the shuttle hard on a secondary pad, narrowly avoiding a fiery demise. Snatching up the pulse rifle and a clutch of thermal detonators, his face hardened into a mask of grim determination, he moved through the carnage. A whirlwind of lethal grace, he dropped soldiers with brutal precision. Each shot a calculated strike. He was a predator returned to its hunting ground, a wraith resurrected from his past. He found Zara near the main laboratory, huddled behind a makeshift barricade of overturned equipment. Her face was smudged with dirt and sweat, her eyes wide with apprehension, but her grip on the energy pistol was firm. Several wounded colleagues lay around her, desperately returning fire. "Kale," she breathed, her voice ragged. What are you doing here?" "I came to get you out," he stated, his voice devoid of warmth. "What happened?" "Forlag's men," she gasped, trembling. They say my research threatens the Imperium. They're going to destroy it." "What research?" "I can't explain it now. Just help me protect it. It's important that IT could save lives." Details were irrelevant. He trusted her. Her unshakable faith in the possibility of a better galaxy. A faith he often struggled to share. That he took cover, rapidly assessing the grim equation. That Forlag's forces pressed forward, their numbers overwhelming. They couldn't hold for long. "We need to evacuate," he barked. "Can you move your people?" "Hidden escape tunnel," she replied. "But it's across the lab." "I'll create a diversion," he stated. "Get them out." He armed a thermal detonator, tossing it into the cluster of advancing troops. The blast ripped through the compound, scattering wreckage and momentarily stalling the assault. He charged, pulse rifle blazing. Drawing the enemy's fire, he moved with an impossible speed and ferocity, surprising even himself. He was a storm of destruction, a raw force unleashed. He saw Zara guiding her people toward the rear of the lab, their expressions flickering with hope that he had bought them precious seconds. But it wasn't enough. More soldiers poured in, focusing their weapons on him. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped in a vortex of violence. He couldn't win, but he could delay them long enough for Zara and her team to escape. He inhaled deeply, bracing himself. Closing his eyes, he conjured Zara's image, her unwavering belief that he wouldn't fail her. Opening his eyes, his gaze hardened. He was ready. Then, a voice, amplified and distorted by the compound's comm system, echoed through the facility. "Kale, stand down. This is General Forlag. You are ordered to surrender immediately." Kale ignored him, pouring fire into the enemy ranks. "Kale, you are harboring traitors. You defy the will of the Imperium. Surrender now, or face the consequences." He paused, brow furrowed. Forlag wasn't just aiming to kill him. He was trying to break him. He was forcing him to choose allegiance to the Imperium or the preservation of innocent life. He glanced toward the rear, glimpsing Zara and her team disappearing into the escape tunnel. They were safe. For now. Turning back to Forlag's soldiers, his face steeled that he knew what he had to do. That he lowered his pulse rifle, raising his hands in surrender. "I surrender," he announced, his voice ringing through the ruins. Four-lag soldiers surged forward, shackling his hands and feet. They dragged him to the center of the lab, where Four-lag stood, his face a canvas of cold satisfaction. "Well, Kale," Four-lag sneered, his voice thick with contempt. "I confess, I'm disappointed. I believed you possessed more strength. I believed you were a true warrior." "I am a warrior," Kale countered, his voice steady. "But I'm not your weapon." "You could have been," Four-lag lamented. "You could have stood by my side. Together, we could have purged the Imperium of its weakness, its decay. But you chose to align yourself with these scientists, these dreamers. You chose to betray the Imperium." "I chose to protect the innocent," Kale declared. "That isn't betrayal, that's duty." Four-lag barked a harsh laugh. "Duty? You comprehend nothing of duty. You are a killer, Kale, a monster, and now you will pay the price." He gestured to his troops. "Take him. Prepare him for execution." As they hauled him away, Kale glanced back at the escape tunnel, a spark of hope flickering in his chest. He had made his decision, he had drawn his line, and he would face the music knowing he'd stood for what was right. Even if his life was the price, he had to trust that Zara and the secrets she guarded were now beyond Four-lag's reach, and that perhaps, from the Imperium's ashes, she could cultivate something good. Unleashed. The stun cuffs, a buzzing irritation against Kale's skin, were a mere blip in the symphony of chaos. Four-lag soldiers, high on their presumed triumph, had cinched the perimeter around the research facility, weapon muzzles aimed at the entrance. The ghost of a smile touched Kale's lips. They believed they'd won. A fatal misjudgment. The first hint of their error arrived as a sudden vacuum of sound. The preceding nervous babble evaporated. Then, the earth shivered. A deep, resonant growl clawed its way out of the facility, vibrating through bone and marrow, raising hackles on every neck. "What in the void?" a trooper stammered, his energy rifle trembling in his grip. Kale remained a silent observer, a predator savoring the unfolding drama. The growl swelled, escalating into a cacophony of rending metal. The facility's reinforced blast doors, engineered to withstand tremendous pressure, warped and groaned inward. Four-lag, pacing the edge of the perimeter, snapped commands. "Maintain formation. Target anything that moves." A hail of energy bolts ripped through the doorway, searing the air with crackling discharges and the sharp scent of ozone. The barrage proved useless. Stepping from the ruins wasn't the expected KRYL, but Kale himself. However, this was no longer the subdued captive they'd secured. The stun cuffs lay in pieces, violently severed. His eyes, normally the color of a stormy sea, blazed with a fierce, untamed fire. His movements possessed a liquid grace, an impossible speed, a whirlwind of controlled force. He didn't meet them head-on. Instead, he became a wraith, melting into the shadows and exploiting the scattered wreckage as covered. He flowed around the energy streams, his reflexes honed over years of battle, each motion deliberate and economical. He was nature's fury, unleashed. The first soldier crumpled without a whimper. Kale was upon him before he could react, wrenching away his weapon with a brutal, swift twist, then using it as a bludgeon. The rifle stock exploded against his helmet, the force sending him sprawling and unconscious. Another soldier, witnessing his comrade's fall, swung his weapon towards Kale, but he was already gone. A fleeting shadow at his back, he seized the barrel, wrenching it skyward with such force that the trooper lost his grip. Before a sound could escape his lips, Kale reversed the weapon, delivering a crushing blow to the solar plexus with the butt. The trooper folded, gasping in vain for air. Four-lag watched in stupefied disbelief. His troops, the elite of the Empire, were being systematically dismantled by a lone figure. A man he'd personally supervised the capture of. A man whose capabilities he had utterly misjudged. "Concentrated fire," he roared, his voice veined with desperation. "Eliminate him." The remaining troopers focused their fire, creating a seemingly impenetrable wall of energy. Yet Kale refused to be contained. He turned the fallen soldiers into makeshift shields, deflecting the energy bolts with their armor plating. He moved with uncanny speed and agility, a deadly ballet executed with chilling elegance. he wasn't merely fighting. He was dissecting, adjusting. Seizing opportunities, he registered the minute delay between each shot, the subtle shifts in formation as they attempted. To anticipate his maneuvers, he weaponized this knowledge, predicting their actions and countering with remorseless efficiency. He tore a power cell from a disabled rifle and hurled it like a grenade. It struck a fuel reservoir on a nearby transport, triggering a chain reaction of explosions that sent bodies flying. He used the ensuing pandemonium to close the distance, engaging them in close quarters. Here, Kale reigned supreme. Energy weapons were worthless at arm's length. The troopers, trained for ranged encounters, were ill-equipped to face his brutal, pragmatic techniques. He moved with a ferocity bordering on the supernatural, a tempest of fists and feet that he employed pressure points, nerve, strikes, and joint locks to disable his adversaries. Bones shattered with ease under his relentless assault. Each movement calibrated for maximum impact. He fought with a detached, almost clinical precision, his face a mask of impassivity. Rusty, observing the carnage from within the facility, emitted a series of rapid clicks that bordered on excitement. Exceptional combat aptitude detected. Kale's performance parameters exceeding projected models. Probability of success against current threat, 99.997%. Zara, huddled with her team, near the concealed tunnel entrance, watched the monitor screens with a blend of awe and fear. Kale was a nightmare, she realized. But he was their nightmare. He was protecting them, buying them the time they desperately needed to escape. "We have to move," she said, her voice wavering. "He's giving us a chance. We can't squander it." One of her researchers, a young woman named Anya, hesitated. "But what about him? He can't possibly survive this." Zara gazed at the monitor, at Kale's unyielding onslaught. He knew the stakes. He made his decision. With leaden hearts, they began their descent into the tunnel, abandoning Kale to confront the legion of enemies alone. Outside, Forlag's forces were unraveling. The troopers, demoralized and petrified, were on the brink of collapse. Kale had morphed into a symbol of indomitable power, a specter of imminent death. Forlag, his face flushed crimson with rage, drew his sidearm. "Cowards, hold the line. Kill him." He fired at Kale, but the shot went astray. Kale, seizing the opening, charged towards Forlag, weaving through the remaining soldiers like a phantom. Forlag emptied his magazine, but Kale evaded each projectile with nonchalant ease. He closed the gap, his eyes locking onto Forlag's. There was no trace of trepidation in his gaze, only an icy, calculating resolution. He disarmed Forlag with a lightning-fast kick, sending the weapon spinning through the air. Forlag, now defenseless and exposed, stumbled backward. You can't prevail," he stammered, his voice trembling. "The Empire's might is insurmountable." Kale remained silent. He simply seized Forlag by the throat, his grip tightening like a vice. Forlag gasped for air, his face turning a mottled purple. "The Empire is built on fear," Kale said, his voice a low, menacing growl. "And fear is a fragile foundation." He refrained from killing Forlag. Not yet. He slammed him against the side of a transport vehicle, rendering him unconscious. Then, he turned his attention back to the remaining soldiers. The battle had reached its conclusion. The survivors, having cast aside their weapons, knelt on the ground, their faces buried in their hands. They had been witness to something truly horrifying, something that would haunt their waking hours for decades to come. Kale stood amidst the devastation, his body coated in dust and grime, his breath ragged. He was physically drained, but his eyes continued to burn with that fierce, feral light. He had made his point. He was a force that demanded respect. He glanced towards the hidden tunnel, a silent acknowledgement that Zara and her team had escaped. His immediate objective was complete. He had shielded them. He had secured the time they needed. But he knew this was merely the initial skirmish. That Forlag's coup remained unresolved, and he, Kale, was now an outlaw, a fugitive, marked for elimination. Rusty, observing the scene from the facility, emitted a series of thoughtful clicks. Kale has successfully neutralized the immediate threat. However, extended strategic projections indicate a substantial escalation of risk factors. Probability of continued survival declining. Recommendation: immediate extraction, and relocation. Kale disregarded the AI's counsel. He had a different agenda. He had unleashed the inner beast, and now he planned to wield it. He would challenge Forlag, not for the sake of the Empire, but for the chance at a future free from tyranny, at a future in which Zara's research could bring hope, not dread, at a future where even a monster like him could find a measure of atonement. He turned and walked away from the carnage. Dissolving into the shadows, he was determined to make Forlag answer for his crimes. He would show the Empire the full extent of his capabilities. That he was Kale, the assassin, the guardian, the insurgent. And he was unleashed upon the world. A spark of hope. Kale leaned against the wall, its durasteel surface blistered and reeking of plasma. A jolt of pain radiated from his left arm, a constant reminder of the brutal firefight. Despite the throbbing ache, a hard-won peace settled within him. Zara and her team were, for the moment, safe. The AI's shrill warnings about his exposed position nagged at him, yet he dismissed them. Retreat was no longer an option. That he activated his calm, the speaker's spitting static. Kale here. Any loyalist elements within range. Respond. Silence greeted him, save for the drone of the failing life support. That he repeated the call, his tone now a forceful command edged with desperation. This is Kale. I repeat, loyalist forces, respond. Forlag has launched a coup. Resist him. A fractured signal pierced the static. Kale? Is that really you? The voice wavered, thick with incredulity. Identify yourself. Kale snapped, his grip tightening around his pulse rifle. This is Jax, Praetorian Guard aspirant. I was stationed near the perimeter. We received stand-down orders. But something felt wrong. Kale detected the youth's uncertainty. Fresh out of training, most likely. Jax, Forlag is a traitor. He seized control. Can you muster any other guards? A beat of silence. There's a handful of us, sir. Hold up in Sector Gamma 9. Most are bewildered. They don't know what to believe. Tell them to trust their instincts, Jax. Tell them Forlag is wielding fear as a weapon. And tell them I'm still in the fight. Fighting. But the reports, they branded you a KRYLL sympathizer, a traitor yourself. Kale drew a slow breath. Forlag is a puppeteer of deceit. He's twisted the truth to serve his ambitions. That I defended Zara's facility. That I secured her research that could save lives from falling into Forlag's grasp. That is the truth. Research? What kind? An undercurrent of curiosity warmed Jax's voice. Irrelevant for now. The priority is stopping Forlag. Can you stand and fight, Jax? A newfound steel resonated in Jax's response. Yes, sir, we can doubt we'll fight for the Emperor, for the Imperium. Good. Stand by for instructions. Kale severed the connection. That a flicker of defiance had ignited. Small yet promising. That he infiltrated the facility's internal network, bypassing archaic security with a practiced ease honed from countless infiltrations. He uploaded a compressed, heavily coded message. A single image, a snapshot extracted from the security feed. Kale, a silhouette of defiance against Forlag stormtroopers. Pulse rifle spitting energy. The image shot through restricted military channels, stripped of identifying markers. Let Forlag try to bury that image. Let him attempt to strangle the truth. Within hours, the image became an emblem of dissent, of nascent hope. On the bridge of the Imperial cruiser Dauntless, Captain Alaravan's face was a mask of steely resolve as she gazed at the holographic display. The Dauntless, alongside a handful of defiant vessels, had rejected Forlag's command, reaffirming their loyalty to the Emperor. Their ranks were thinning, morale flagging under the onslaught of Forlag's propaganda, which cast Kale as a monster threatening the Imperium. Then, the image manifested, unsolicited, anonymous, yet radiating a raw, undeniable power. Kale, the supposed traitor, standing defiant against impossible odds. Captain, her communications officer's voice was hushed with awe. We're receiving encrypted messages from numerous sources. Praetorian Guard units, planetary defense forces, they're questioning Forlag's authority, demanding proof of his accusations. A ghost of a smile touched Alara's lips. Proof he cannot furnish. Magnify the image. Broadcast it on all channels. Let the galaxy witness the truth. The Dauntless thrummed to life, its engines resonating with fresh vigor. Other loyal vessels followed suit, their turbolasers charged, poised to challenge Forlag's blockade on the ravaged streets of Corvus Prime. A squad of battered planetary defense troops huddled behind a makeshift barricade, their spirits crushed after days of relentless combat against Forlag's forces. They'd heard the slanders, the rumors of Kale's perfidy. They'd seen comrades fall to KRYL augmented soldiers. Despair had taken root. Then, the image seared across their helmet visors. Kale, a lone figure silhouetted against the encroaching darkness. "He's fighting for us," one soldier rasped, emotion cracking his voice. "He's fighting for the Imperium," another added, his grip firming on his lost gun. Revived fire blazed in their eyes. They surged from behind the barricade, their lost guns spitting incandescent bolts, their renewed battle cries echoing through the ravaged city. The image of Kale spread like wildfire, carried on the winds of renewed hope. It reached the ears of skeptical officers, disillusioned soldiers, and ordinary citizens suffocating under Forlag's oppressive rule. That IT became a rallying beacon in the oppressive darkness. Forlag, entrenched within the Imperial Palace on Corvus Prime, monitored the incoming reports with mounting rage. His carefully constructed narrative was collapsing, undone by a single, defiant image. "Find him," he thundered at his officers. "Find Kale. I want him dead. Any who aid him will share his fate." But the pursuit was fruitless. Kale had dissolved into the shadows, leaving behind only the ember of rebellion. Meanwhile, deep within the twisting tunnels beneath Zara's facility, Kale moved with focused intent, his senses heightened, his movements economical. He knew Forlag would be hunting him. He knew the odds were stacked against him. He was beyond caring that he had a plan, a desperate gamble. He needed to reach Valerius, discover his fate, and uncover the full extent of Forlag's conspiracy. He needed to expose Forlag's treachery to the entire galaxy. He located a concealed access, a forgotten maintenance shaft leading to the surface. He paused, drawing a deep breath, bracing himself for the trials ahead. That he knew he was walking into a viper's nest, knew Forlag would be lying in wait. He had no other choice. He had to fight. That he emerged from the shaft into the biting Corvus Prime night. The air was heavy with the stench of smoke and death. The city was a battleground, a grim testament to Forlag's ambitions. He activated his comm again, attempting to contact Jax. "Jax, can you hear me?" "Kale, we're here. We've secured a landing zone, but it's heavily guarded. I'm en route. Provide covering fire." Kale navigated the ruined cityscape, a wraith in the shadows, pulse rifle raised, senses screaming. He felt the unseen eyes of Forlag's forces tracking his every step. He reached the landing zone, a small, desolate plaza ringed by shattered structures. Jax and his small contingent of Praetorian guards were pinned behind a hastily constructed barricade, trading fire with a heavily armed squad of stormtroopers. Kale charged into the chaos, a whirlwind of lethal force. That he moved with uncanny speed and precision, his pulse rifle spitting incinerating bolts, his movements a fluid dance of death. The stormtroopers barely registered his arrival before they were falling, their armor breached by Kale's relentless barrage. Jax and his guards gaped for a moment, shock giving way to renewed determination. They surged into the fray, their lost guns blazing, their morale surging. Together, they cleared the landing zone, securing a perimeter for an incoming transport. "Kale," Jax said, his voice laced with grateful awe, "we won't fail you." "I know you won't," Kale replied, his gaze sweeping the horizon. "The true battle has just begun." A sleek transport descended from the sky, its engines a roaring symphony. It touched down in the plaza, its ramp extending to the ground. "Get aboard," Kale commanded. "We're going to the Imperial Palace." Jax hesitated. "The palace? That's suicide." "Perhaps," Kale said, a hard smile playing on his lips. "But it's a suicide mission worth undertaking." He stepped onto the transport, his gaze fixed on the distant silhouette of the Imperial Palace, a monument to both power and corruption. That he knew he was walking into the maw of the beast. Knew Forlag would be anticipating his arrival. He also knew he had to try. He had to stop Forlag, not just for himself, but for the future of the Imperium. The transport lifted off, its engines screaming, carrying Kale towards his destiny.